Thank you very much, AGP. Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon. It's still daylight out. It is Wednesday, May 24th, 2023, and we are having a continuation of our budget hearing, special meeting, and we will establish a quorum and call the meeting to order.
I'm going to start with Councilmember Edwards. Here. Councilmember Landrum.
Here.
Councilmember Ford.
Here.
And Mayor Wixom.
Here.
And I see Councilmember Barton arriving just now.
Thank you. And with that, Councilmember Landrum, can you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And public comment for items on the agenda. Please join us, Mr. Heller. A little different format tonight since we're continuing. Yes, thank you.
I'm glad to see that at least three of us still care about the water reclamation facility project. So I don't know if this applies to item 1 or item 2, but I'm kind of at a point where I feel like the recycled water portion has dragged on longer than it should have. My agenda correspondence, I asked, am I on? Yeah. Okay, I'll lean in more. I asked that within 30 days, the management team come back with what they project to be the total cost for the recycle project when it is done. That's number 1. Number 2, within 30 days, I'd like to see what their estimate is for the cost per acre foot that will be generated when the project is done. And lastly, the third thing, I'd like to see if a rate increase is required to support those numbers, what that might look like as well. So I drove all the way down here just to say those 3 things, but I think they're really important. They're questions the community has asked for a long time, and in the interest of transparency, I'm not trying to pull rabbits out of a hat, but I think this team is extremely experienced, and they should be able to put together some reasonable numbers within 30 days. I'm not saying hire an estimating consultant. I'm saying get the team together, do your best at figuring out total cost of the project, cost of acre foot water produced, and whether a rate increase will be required. I'm not going to stay any longer. Thank you very much. I'm going to have dinner with my wife, which is important after 4 years of not doing that. So thanks a lot and have a great meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Heller. Any other public comment? AGP, is there anyone in the queue for public comment?
Hi, Mayor Wixom. There's nobody in the queue for public comment.
Thank you very much. With that, I will close public comment and bring it back to council. And this is our budget study session, part 2, review of fiscal year 23-24 draft. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Carpenter and to our city finance director, Ms. Johnson-Rios.
Yes. Mayor, members of council, you're about to receive a very detailed presentation of the capital budget, but just as a reminder, following that and questions and comments relative to the capital budget, we would like to hear any last feedback or questions about the operating budget, and we do need to resolve or get direction from council on the recommendation from CFAC. So with that, we'll jump into the capital budget, and I'm going to turn it over to our Public Works Director.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. Just waiting for the slides to pop up. Is it going to full screen or? Well, I can begin. Thank you. Honorable Mayor and members of the City Council, pleased to present you with the proposed fiscal year 23-24 capital projects budget. Brief outline of what we're going to be discussing tonight and reviewing. First, I'll give a overview of the capital project budget. We'll spend some time talking about capital project implementation, how that works, and what our capacity is here to do these projects at the city. We'll dive into, I think I have 4 or 5 projects, key projects that we're working on, into some level of detail. Unfortunately, we can't do that for all 31 requests. I think we'd probably be here well into the night. So I just chose 4 or 5, but if any council member or the mayor has any questions about any of the capital projects, we do have everyone here to answer questions. We'll do a deep dive into the wharf program budget for next fiscal year. A brief slide on funding to show the funding sources, and then we'll take questions. So for an overview for fiscal year 23-24, we're looking at a $19.5 million investment into city infrastructure, and it's going to be in 7 broad categories. One is the wharf, kind of on its own, a category of its own. The next is water projects and utility projects that have come up recently. A third is storm recovery. A fourth is roadways, safety, and ADA projects. We have 3 projects for analysis and planning, a couple harbor projects and 1 fire project, and then 3 vehicle equipment purchases or saving for future purposes. Those aren't really projects, the vehicles, they're more capital purchases, but we do include them in the capital project budget. I want to call out that many of the projects you'll be seeing tonight are multi-year projects that are already in progress, that have already started and are at some phase of project delivery. And as such, those projects that have already been started will be carrying forward funds, if there are any funds to carry over, from the current fiscal year to next fiscal year. And thumbs up from Assistant City Manager Johnson Rios if that now happens automatically, or does that happen by council resolution? Yeah. It happens by council resolution that will be on June 13th as part of budget approval. Thank you. So this year we're expecting to carry over somewhere to the tune of $25 million. A lot of that is in the wharf program. So that means that in a prior year, maybe this year, this fiscal year, or the year before, budget was authorized. It didn't all get spent because we didn't get as far along the project as we would have liked in this fiscal year. So it carries forward to next fiscal year. It will be spent next fiscal year. But the projects that I'm about to talk about, the numbers I'm about to show, are only new authorizations that we're asking for. So, for example, with the water reclamation facility program, $6.83 million, that's not necessarily what's going to be spent in this coming fiscal year. That request is for the City Council to authorize that amount to go towards that project. Anyway, that's the first one. That's an easy one. Our water utility projects. So we have a $400,000 project for RO piping modifications. This actually we tried to pin to the wharf project. We were hoping to take advantage of low interest financing. To pay for that, we found out that the funding was just incompatible, and so we de-scoped that work from Anvil, which is probably a good thing for a few reasons, but that does mean that we'll have to take it on as a separate capital project. This is a new project, and it's one that's required by our regulators.
Greg, what does RO stand for?
I apologize. That is our reverse osmosis
thank
system down on Atascadero Road. We're also proposing a $500,000 Morro Basin well field rehabilitation project. That happens to be one of the projects that I'll be presenting some more detail on later in the presentation. About $500,000 this coming year, we're requesting for the Nutmeg Pressure Zone project. I see this coming fiscal year as being a big year for that project. As the City Council knows, we're currently forecasting that project will cost around $18 million, which is just a very large amount for the water fund. We think we may have some grant funding options that we'd be bringing to council in the next fiscal year that could maybe pay for up to half or more of that project. That will require some interesting decisions from the City Council later on next fiscal year. We're also going to look at potentially some other options for that project to potentially reduce cost if there's any ways we could find to do that. So that's water. On the sewer side, the Beachcomber Drive area backyard sewer project. In the Beachcomber area, in the beach tract, we have the sewer mains going in between the backyards of homes. And there's inflow and infiltration issues there with the sewer lines. That means that water is getting into the sewer that shouldn't be in there through joints and cracks and overwhelming our sewer system, which is something we want to avoid. If left unchecked, it could turn into a much worse situation. That is a new project, but it is related to the next project, which was in the One Water Plan, which is fully designed already and ready for construction, the Beachcomber Drive sewer main replacement. So that project has a substantial budget already that's carrying forward, but based on our analysis, we'll need approximately another $150,000 to get into construction of that project this coming fiscal year. The Main Street and the Atascadero Road sewer replacements are, I believe, at 60% design. Is that right? 50 to 60% design. We think there's a chance we can get into construction on that project this fiscal year, this coming fiscal year. That is, again, a multi-year project that the city has been working on. That project is a bit complicated because we have some jointly owned utilities in the Atascadero Road alignment with Cayucos Sanitary District. And so part of this project was put on hold, partly because of that and partly because of all the conveyance work that was going on the Atascadero Road. We hoped to do that concurrently originally. It just didn't really work out for a variety of reasons. $600,000 for outfall inspection, condition assessment, and cleaning. This is another one that we tried to pin on the wharf project so that we could take advantage of low-interest financing. It would have been a great move, except that we found our funders did not think that that would be eligible for funding. So we're going to have to pay for that one out of the sewer fund. Paul Miko could answer questions about that if needed, or about the project itself. $250,000 for utility manhole rehabilitation project. That's a new project. I'll be going into some more detail about that later in the presentation. $135,000 for wastewater treatment plant decommissioning, a multi-year project. We're hoping to get some progress on that one. Again, that project will be wrapped up in some negotiations with Cayucos Sanitary District, so look forward to working on that. Next broad category is storm recovery. I'll gloss over these a bit because we've talked about the storm recovery a little bit in yesterday's meeting, but we expect to spend up to $800,000 on facilities and equipment damages, $400,000 on pavement and road repairs, $200,000 on dock repairs this year. And we're hoping that all of this can be eligible for reimbursement, not necessarily all the costs, but the projects themselves. Again, FEMA can kick up to 75% of the projects. Cal OES up to 18.75%, which leaves 6.25% to our agency. We're going to do the best we can to recover and maximize that funding, but we'd have to have this capital outlay to do the work, and that's why you're seeing this request for authorization from the City Council tonight. Partly related to the storm recovery is the annual storm drain replacement and maintenance program. So we currently have a roadway maintenance program annually. Staff is proposing that we have an annual storm drain replacement program. We know that our storm drains, to replace them, it would far exceed $200,000, but what we're proposing is to do little by little every year so that we can present the kinds of issues that we saw this winter when we had, I believe, 5 storm drains fail, where we have to get into emergency work. Ideally, we want to prevent that so we can do it less expensively. We're also looking at a waterways and storm systems management plan. This is based on the model that the City of San Luis Obispo has. It's not very easy to prioritize projects using city funds on private property. That gets a little hairy. But with a plan that's developed in a public way, engaging the public, we can look at stormwater diversion projects, sediment removal projects. Some of these projects may include financial participation from private property owners or not. There may possibly be grants out there for some of this stuff. I just throw out there that the city may want to look at creating a zone of benefits under the San Luis Obispo County Flood Control District so that we can actually get funding for stormwater projects. That's not something we have now. There are areas in the city of San Luis Obispo that are assessed so that there is flood control money. We don't have that, but that could be a potential source of revenue down the road to help fund the projects that would come out of the management plan. So anyway, just an idea, but so that's storm recovery, roadways, safety, and ADA is another one of our categories. What I see is a pretty aggressive 2.1 million annual pavement management program that we're proposing. That largely comes from Q&E and some state gas tax money. I believe that would be the most that the city's ever done in its history, but it's still short of the 2.8 million a year that we would need to do just to maintain our current pavement condition index. We'll talk about that a little later in the presentation. Excuse me. State Route 1, State Route 41, and Main Street intersection improvements. City Council knows this project well. We're proposing to put $826,000, mostly of the development impact fees that were designated for this project, actually into this specific project. That would bring the city funded financial portion to just over $2 million. We already have $1.2 million of Measure Q&E funds from prior authorizations. And that was part of a commitment that we made to SLOCOG, I want to say at the very end of calendar year 21, that we would have some sort of financial plan to meet their commitment, not necessarily to match it, but to meet it, to show that we're serious about improvements at this intersection. The local road safety plan implementation. So that is for safety improvements around the city. As discussed at last night's city council meeting, this is not for a new plan. This is not to update a plan. We're doing the plan now. We're getting a consultant on board now. We're going to have a public process to determine which safety projects on our roads are priorities. Once we have that, we want to start doing the projects. One of those projects that will be prioritized, as discussed with the police department, is a crosswalk from their parking lot over to the police station. We could put in a temporary or interim solution, but I do want to call out that without proper engineering of these sorts of solutions, if there is an accident and it's not engineered properly, the city could be liable if there's an accident that it didn't follow an appropriate process. So what we're doing here is we want to see a process through so that we can implement these solutions correctly. $150,000 for sidewalk and tree replacements. This was discussed a bit last night. We have a lot of sidewalk uplifts around town. Last fiscal year, maybe it was early this fiscal year, we spent around $60,000 on sidewalk improvements next to Tacos Day. We filled in a gap in the sidewalk in front of, on Main Street, just up the street there. There was just a really rough sidewalk that we fixed. We also put in ADA ramps on Embarcadero next to Atascadero Road. Concrete work is expensive. So, just $60,000 got us 4 projects a year ago. So we want to do more. There's a lot of projects, particularly in the downtown, this upper downtown area here on Harbor, where you see these like rubber tiles in place of sidewalk. Those were put in many years ago as an innovative solution to avoid putting in concrete, probably much cheaper, unanticipated consequences that they start to warp and create their own issues. So those are the sorts of things we'd like to replace. At times when we go in to do those replacements, we have to cut into trees that essentially makes those trees a hazard. And so part of this money would be for tree replacements as well. We think this money could be flexible for us so that if we saw an opportunity to combine it with another project and bid it out at the same time, we could do that, depending on where we're looking at doing our paving. We'll talk about paving a little bit later. Lila Kaiser parking lot and ADA upgrades. I know there's some questions about that, so we look forward to answering those. That is a new project, but an old need. The parking lot is in rough shape, and I don't even think there's ADA parking there now. So that's something that we want to correct to make that park accessible to everyone. Analysis and planning. Did I mention there's 31 projects in here? Analysis and planning, we have 3. We talked a bit about the active transportation plan. I believe 67,000 of that was coming out of Q&E, and another 13,000 was coming out of, I'm looking for some help here. I don't remember where. Was it the Bike Path Fund? I think it was the Bike Path Fund. Thank you, Sarah. Again, that helps the city be eligible and competitive with grant funding specific to the active transportation program through the state of California. $190,000 for one water plant update. We already authorized, I believe, $80,000 last year for this. We haven't started it yet. The one water plant is supposed to be updated once every 5 years. The last update was approved by City Council in October or November of 2018. That puts us at 5 years, really. And I would like to note that the One Water Plan, which was a very big undertaking at the time, was not a conditions assessment of our infrastructure. It was a capacity assessment. It looked at what build out of the city would be in 20 or 25 years based on projections in the general plan, and what the sizing of all the pipes were around town and whether they were at the appropriate sizing. And it found that many of our pipes were not at the appropriate sizing. So it made recommendations for projects to upgrade those pipes, some of which are underway. It also made recommendations to other projects. It wasn't all pipes. But what we would like to do this time around is look more at condition. You know, it's nice to know that we want to upgrade a 12-inch storm drain to an 18-inch storm drain, but if the storm drain looks like a fishbone because it's been rusting over the past 15 years, we probably want to, you know, take care of that one first. And so we see that as a way. That's just an example, but it's not only for storm drains. We actually want to do that more quickly. Our sewer lines, I mean, we have to take a look at their condition in order to better prioritize those projects, so we don't have issues like the force main that broke under Highway 1, and all the water main breaks that we are kind of having regularly. And Damaris can speak to that if needed. And then finally, a transit comprehensive operational analysis. Fancy way of saying we don't know if we have the right bus routes right now. COVID totally changed how people use public transit, and the ridership has changed. The culture around public transportation has changed, and this would be funded completely under our grant, our transit fund grants. So the result of this would be recommendations to make changes on our routes. Again, since we're into public engagement and public works, we'd want to do this publicly and get input from the community to understand what the needs are. We're getting to the end. Some miscellaneous projects, Veterans Hall building improvements. We're sitting in Veterans Hall now. It is not ADA accessible. The bathrooms are not ADA. There's some improvements that we feel would benefit the public in terms of this meeting space as a council chambers. We know that there are pretty grave audiovisual needs here. City staff is proposing this project because we want to avoid doing duplicate work. If we're going to open up the building to do AV, we'd like to take care of more than just the AV while we have it all open. Also, if we are doing upgrades to the building itself, it would present us with the opportunity to permanently install AV rather than have the kind of rollout equipment that we see here that requires additional, staff and contractor time to manage. Coleman Park improvements. This is a multi-year project. We hope to get started on design this year. There still is a grant that we're going to chase that we think we have a good shot of getting. But ultimately, we have to design what this park will look like for generations to come. So that's the basis of that request. We have $60,000 for trash and recycling can replacements. We built our own prototype of the future trash can that I'd like to show off at some point. But just to buy the materials, even if we build it with community volunteers, which is our goal, we think it'll cost up to $60,000. I mean, it involves welding, but it would be very similar to Cambria's trash and recycling covers, which are made out of either redwood or a composite that is made to look like redwood, but that has beautiful planters on top where succulents are maintained. Our trash and recycling cans are really in bad shape. I mean, they are old school. So anyway, $60,000 buys the materials. Harbor North T-Pier repairs, the city got congressionally directed funding of $1.5 million for that T-Pier. Not enough to work on the T-Pier. The $40,000 for this upcoming fiscal year proposed is to scope out exactly what we would do with that $1.5 million. Fire, there's $80,000 requested for a remodel design for the Bonita station to enhance their level of service to the community and in North Morro Bay. And finally, the vehicles. So sewer and water, some of this money is to buy vehicles that are needed. In one case, we're using a vehicle that's over 20 years old. When I got here, there was a vehicle that you could see through the floor of the driver's seat and onto the ground. It was so rusted through. So some of this is to buy new vehicles and upgrade the vehicles. Some of it is to just save money so that when we need to make a future purchase, we can do it. Water and sewer work with some specialized vehicles that are very expensive, sometimes $500,000. So we want to have some of that money squirreled away for those occasions when needed. And then the harbor department is looking to replace a vehicle to the tune of $40,000. So those are the 31 requests. And I'm going to keep moving unless someone stops me.
Do you want us to ask questions now or when you get through the next section? What's better?
Well,
You can have
probably let's wait because I'm going to go into some of
more
the projects
information.
into more
Perfect.
detail
Thank
and
you.
answer the questions. Capital project implementation, there's been a lot of questions lately about how capital projects are implemented and what our capacity is to do them. Those are important questions, we feel. So it's worth going through at a high level what the stages of a capital project are. So we see capital projects happening in four main stages or phases. First is the planning phase, and that includes public engagement. So first we need to talk about what is the project that the city even wants to do. So a lot of that is talking with the community, going to the PWAB, taking phone calls, talking to council, talking with regional partners or regulators at the state or county level. And then the next stage goes into project approval and environmental determination. Project approval, in some ways, is a fancy way of saying that the city council approves the project and we get funded in a budget. And then we jump in and we go into the environmental phase of a project. Environmental phase can take many years. It could take just a signature, depending on, and which, take 10 minutes, depending on what the project is. Sometimes at this phase of the project is when the city would do a preliminary design if needed. Sometimes that happens in the planning phase, depending on the complexity of the project. Then we get into the design phase. That's when we pay consultant engineers to develop blueprints, essentially, that come with specifications and estimates. The specifications are important because when we go out to construction, out to bid, we have to give a reasonable document to a contractor so they know what to bid on. So those specifications are what they bid on, and that's one of the items that's developed in the design phase. And then cost estimates for the project and estimates of quantities and things like that. How much pavement, how much concrete, et cetera. And then the final phase is construction and inspection. So we have many projects already in progress. Many of them are at various stages in this process. Some of them haven't been started. That doesn't mean there's projects that we know of that aren't in here. I mean, there's certainly projects out there that we want to do. We just don't have staff capacity to do. But I would say we have around 40 projects right now on our desk, if not more. And that's not including smaller maintenance projects, but just the capital projects. So what's our capacity to do that? Well, we have an engineering division, which is a good start. We have a city engineer, Eric Ridio. He's outstanding. About 50 to 60% of his time is spent on capital projects. He nudged me earlier and said it's probably a little less than that, but let's say I hope it's around 50 or 60. Eric does a lot for the city and a lot for the department, writing reports, answering questions of the public, of the city council, of the PWAB, working with development reviews, and basically getting it rolled into a lot of meetings. We have an associate, so Eric is our main project manager right now. So he is managing probably, 85 to 90% of the projects. We have an associate engineer who largely focuses on development reviews and encroachment permits. She manages 1 or 2 projects right now, Transit Hub and Coleman, with some support from others. I neglected to put our engineering tech in here, who is focused on encroachment permits. He doesn't spend any time on capital projects, but he is in the engineering division. We have an acting public works inspector. Maybe 25% of his time is spent on capital project implementation. His role is limited to inspecting those projects. So he's not developing them or putting things out to bid or anything like that. He's going and checking on the work. That's something that we haven't had in the past. It's really a great thing to have because, with Eric only having 50 or 60% of his time to work on capital projects, if he were doing inspection too, a lot less would be getting done. So just as an example, with Transit Hub, Matt Bishop, who's the acting public works inspector, has been out there talking to the contractor, understanding what they're doing. If they're doing something wrong, he calls it out. He makes requests, makes sure that they're following what's in the bid, et cetera, and make sure that they're doing the work right. We do bring on consultants as needed. Sometimes we bring them on as project managers because we don't have the capacity to take on projects. Sometimes our consultants are doing more specialized work like land surveying or geotechnical studies or design work that we don't have the software to do, let alone the capacity. And that brings me to the last point, which is we are requesting in this year's, this coming fiscal year's budget, a senior civil engineer because we think we can put that individual on at 90% on capital projects and really advance the dozens of projects that we have on the books, let alone the ones that we don't even have on the books yet. I think there is enough work years to come because of all the deferred maintenance that we have in the city. I think we came up with an innovative solution to funding this position because we knew that Q&E funds, there wasn't much to speak of. General fund is in a structural deficit, and so this position would be paid out of 4 funds because they'd be working on many different projects, so sewer, water, harbor, and Q&E, so as not to impact any one fund too much. So anyway, that's our implementation there. I'll go into some project details. Storm recovery from the January storms, we estimate around $16 to $18 million of damage. I've talked a little bit at City Council in the past about the 2 buckets, hazard mitigation versus public assistance. So we'll talk about public assistance first. We're starting to dial that in. We have some due dates coming up in June for that. We're looking at over 30 projects that we're submitting. These are the projects that are reimbursable up to 75%. The purpose of public assistance money is to bring damaged infrastructure back to its original condition. Not its original condition when it was first built, right? But the condition prior to the storm. So let's take Preston Lane as an example. We'll submit that as a project. It was in rough shape before the storm. So are we going to get a brand new street paid for by FEMA? Very likely not, unless we have a very generous project delivery manager from FEMA Anyway, just to give you an idea, the categories that FEMA has, I put them here. They involve debris cleanup, operations response, roads damage, water control facilities damage, and that's a whole category unto itself. That's like levees and things like that. Utilities damage, parks damage, and admin. We actually have damage in all of them. So Eric has been putting a lot of work into that. I've been very involved, and we've been getting a lot of support from other departments too. So for hazard mitigation, there's actually two pots within hazard mitigation, which we recently learned. One is for undamaged infrastructure, and one is for damaged infrastructure. Hazard mitigation, the intent is to enhance measures of protection for infrastructure so that we can avoid disasters in the future. So for undamaged infrastructure, we actually submitted 9 notices of intent. Some of them turned out to be ineligible, but what we did find is that we have 2 that we see as eligible. One is the reverse osmosis building. The water got really close to very critical infrastructure that makes our groundwater drinkable. And if we ever lost that, it would be a very serious problem. Because if for some reason, for example, if there was an earthquake and we lost state water because a pipe burst somewhere and we didn't have it for several weeks, we'd be totally relying on our groundwater wells. And so if we had some sort of dual disaster, which is not inconceivable, we could lose water if we don't have this building protected. So we plan on submitting a grant to protect that building from floodwaters. Storm drains and culverts. The storm drains along or around the Morrow Creek watershed, that's not the word I want to say, the floodplain, the Morrow Creek floodplain, are just not sufficient to handle all the water that's coming in. And we don't yet know what the solution there is, because ultimately all those storm drain facilities go into the creek anyway, and that's full. But we know something has to be done. The storm drains themselves weren't damaged. So this is a good candidate for that bucket of hazard mitigation funds. We've been in contact with the state, and they said that we might be competitive for that grant. But I do want to manage expectations. They told us for the January storms, the state only has $55 million. And this is, as was told to us, quite frankly, by some folks at FEMA, what do they say, political money? Oftentimes this goes to the big jurisdictions. A big jurisdiction like, LA might have a $10 million project that they're awarded, and, that takes a big bite out of the available pot. So we are going to pursue these aggressively, but the likelihood of this bucket being funded is lower. The damaged infrastructure, the likelihood of getting that money is higher. Our FEMA rep told us that they get awarded if they give away this money. So they have so much of it. So I don't know what to believe sometimes. But, our corp yard was damaged, which makes it ineligible for the first bucket. So we could get it repaired in the second bucket, but beyond repairing it, maybe we can just move it so it's not in the flood zone. Maybe there's an acquisition project so that we can move our corp yard. Storm drains that were damaged, we can get enhanced. Harbor facilities that were damaged, like a seawall or the revetments, we want to enhance those to increase the level of protection, not just simply repair them. That makes it eligible for hazard mitigation, the creek work as well. So that's a general overview there of storm recovery.
Greg, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Because lots and lots of this depends on grants, and I'm curious, I know you don't have a huge staff, so what's the breakdown of who's doing the writing? Some of it is your staff and some are outside consultants?
So that's a good question, Councilmember Barton. So for the public assistance money, that first bucket on the other slide, that's not so much writing it up at this point as much as getting it all down on a spreadsheet and getting the GPS coordinates of the locations and getting estimates of damage and all this kind of specific information. that really we have to do regardless of whether it's us doing it or a consultant were to do it. You know, someone has to give the consultant the information. So we're doing that ourselves. We are looking at potentially getting a consultant to help us with this because this will involve more writing. If need be, we can write these grants. That's, you know, when we talked earlier about, you know, why is Eric at 50% capacity on capital projects? Well, he's involved with this kind of stuff. I'm involved with this kind of stuff. We have other folks in the department as well helping, and other folks in other departments as well. The harbor, we asked Ted questions. We asked him for information, or Sarah. And so that all works into the applications. It's tight, to answer your question shortly. Yeah, it's tight.
It's a lot.
Yeah. Any other questions so far on storm recovery? No. Pavement management, you see a road with a hole on it. I think that's Radcliffe. So again, this is an annual program. The scope is to improve road surfaces, increase safety, and maintain pavement condition index. Our current pavement condition index is 61, and I shouldn't even say current. That's when it was last studied last year. We think with the storm, when all things considered, Quintana did get improved, but we really took a beating on the storms. We think it may have dropped a point or two. It typically will drop a point a year. It may have dropped more than that this year. We do have 53 centerline miles of roads to maintain, and the city strives annually to invest Q&E to maintain our road network, Q&E funds. I mentioned that just to maintain our current pavement condition index number of 61, we need to invest $2.8 million per year. I know there's questions about where we're at with pavement management. We're finishing up our fiscal year 21-22 project. That would have been done had it not been for the storms, which created some complications on South Bay with the base being saturated with water. Really couldn't work on it. We hope to get that done in the next couple of months. We're looking at performing design work this summer for the fiscal year 22-23 project. And then next fiscal year, the $2.1 million that we're requesting would again focus on maintaining our good roadways. We don't necessarily want to do a worst first approach. That is the least efficient way to maintain a road network from a cost standpoint. We get the least bang for the buck. However, understanding that North Morro Bay has been suffering poor roads for many years, really since they've been put in, we would like to take a couple of options to the city council later next fiscal year to say, look, you know, we're going to do our efficient work, but we're also going to try to do a little bit of work somewhere in North Morro Bay. We'll do the best we can coming up with that option list. And again, $2.1 million that we're requesting. 141 Main Street intersection, a key project. It's been a hot project lately. The goals are to reduce congestion, increase safety, and decrease the greenhouse gases that come out of cars and trucks. The current level of service there, based on studies, have failures during peak hours, and the city expects the situation to worsen as the city grows. The city funded an ICE study, I don't know, 10 years ago or so. That's an intersection control evaluation. And SLOCOG has committed funds. Environmental is wrapping up. Our public engagement efforts are wrapping up. We have the next step to take this to City Council on June 13th for direction so that we can begin the design phase of the project on whichever alternative the City Council chooses. The project cost, it's a big range here, anywhere from $400,000 to $12 million. $400,000 would be if we chose the no-build alternative, just leave it as it is. That's $400,000 because we already have some sunk costs into the project. We've already paid consultants and done things historically. And that's an estimate, by the way, that I just, you know, kind of the back of my head estimate. And it could be up to $12 million if we choose the most expensive option, which would be a roundabout. One of the projects is the Morro Basin well field improvements. That's a picture of one of our wells that gets us city's water. The purpose of this project is to increase water production, rehabilitate 6 of our existing wells, and we are leaving in an option to add 2 wells in the future if needed. Not necessarily this coming fiscal year, but if we find that that's a need, that we have that in the budget in it for a future fiscal year. Some background, our wells and pumps were installed, 60, 70 years ago, and they haven't really been worked on. So they're old. The city depends on these wells. Again, if we had some issue with state water, we would be totally reliant on these wells. We have no other source of water currently. And every November when state water has its shutdown for their own maintenance, we absolutely rely on these wells for the city's water. We have no other source of water that month. Sometimes they do that for 2 weeks. Sometimes they do that for 4 weeks or longer. Some of the casings have failed. That's like the outer pipe that is covering the drill, so to speak. The wells have not been assessed, and we believe they all need electrical instrumentation and controls, mechanical infrastructure, and site work. So EI and C, that refers to electronic systems that help monitor and manage flow of water, as well as remote control of these wells, so that we don't have to send someone out there to change the valves or do anything like that, and other efficiency improvements. The mechanical infrastructure, in some cases, we just need to outright replace the wells and the pumps. And some site work may be necessary, depending on the well and the issue there. So that will require us to bring on a hydrogeologist to make sure that we're getting the water, that we're able to get the water from where the water actually is. It may require redesign of the wells. So that would be done by a consultant. Project costs, we think over the next 3 years or so, it'll be $3.5 million for fiscal year 24 to get us started, $500,000. Utility manhole rehabilitation. This is a picture of inside a manhole, I believe in the chamber at a joint. This is one of our manholes. That is water just seeping through a joint. So that water shouldn't be there, but it's going into our sewer system. This is not a diagram of a manhole, but it makes the point about inflow and infiltration, which we discussed earlier. When the pipes crack, and this goes for a manhole as well, when the chamber cracks, when there's failed joints, or when there's corrosion, that means that our sewer wastewater can go into the groundwater. It also means that stormwater can get into the pipe. So not a good thing. We'd reduce inflow and infiltration with this project and reline access chambers. Again, I mentioned what the issues are already. It's pretty typical for sewer jurisdictions to have an annual program to address this. We've never had one. So total project, $750,000. We were asking for $250,000 to start for fiscal year 24. The last project we'll go into detail on is the Water Reclamation Facility Program, and I'm going to ask Paul Amico from Carollo Engineers, who's our program manager, to step up and go through the slides. You could just let me know when to change slide.
Okay. Good evening. Again, my name is Paul Amico. I'm the program manager for the Water Reclamation Facility Program. Mayor and Council, thanks for your attention tonight. We had questions in the past about the program budget and the growth of the budget through the years, starting when Carollo took over program management in 2018 to last year's adopted budget of 159.8. So this table shows that for each one of the program components, the three major capital or the three major projects, the facility itself, the conveyance facilities, and recycled water, it shows that the increase in costs or increase in budget through the different years. And then the last category, we actually roll up several different budget categories that the city uses to track budgets, and we just call them the program management and city costs. That's actually 3 different budget line items that we roll up in that, and that's how we report that in the quarterly report. Greg, next slide, please. So, as we always like to do as engineers, we put together the really unclear graphs, so it confuses everyone, and we have to sit and explain it. But this particular graph just shows for each one of the components what we ended up doing in order to increase the budget. For the blue line in the middle, that's the water reclamation facility itself. We've also answered a lot of questions about what guaranteed maximum price means, because as you can see, the GMP, or the guaranteed maximum price, actually has gone up through time. And so when that project was originally bid, the design builders, the 2 different design builders that proposed on a pretty conceptual scope of work for the water reclamation facility and offered a price for that. And the overall objective at the time was to provide a robust but economical design. As that project progressed through time, there were additions and deletions from the project scope, and anytime the city would add something that was not included in the original proposal, that necessitated an increase in the guaranteed maximum price. I think I've got a slide after this that talks about the different categories, and so I can go into that in a little more detail. In the fiscal year 23 adopted budget last year, we presented, and these are the different budget line items. As I said, the different components, the design build for the plant itself is one line item, and then we rolled the conveyance facilities design and professional services, what we call the soft costs, in with the construction costs for an overall budget. And then the same thing with recycled water facilities as well. So you can see that in fiscal year 23, we recommended some reshuffling of budget numbers to move budget into the design build. That budget, that was not sufficient to cover the guaranteed maximum price at the time, so we ended up reshuffling some of the budget line items to come up with the different budgets in each one of the categories. And this is how we've been tracking it since last year. So next slide, please. We've presented this, I think I've presented this a couple different times, but what we try to do is we've tried to capture different categories of for each one of the amendments that Phelons Black and Veatch has received for the water reclamation facility. We've categorized those into whether it was driven by a regulatory agency, in this case, for instance, on amendment number 3. When we refer to regulatory agency driven, that was driven largely from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and additional environmental mitigation measures that needed to be implemented at the plant. And then you can see the different categories. The soil slip ended up costing an additional almost $1.2 million. Third party driven, that's from PG&E, and so. I'm sorry, do you have a question?
Can't see it.
Oh, it's too small?
Yep.
Okay.
It's like the color is hard to. I don't have my glasses.
Unfortunately, I don't know if there's anything we can do about that right now unless we can get the TV moved forward, AGP.
Laurel can't read it either. It's not just me.
I believe you. I'm having trouble reading it myself.
My apologies for that. This was a presentation I actually had given to WRF subcommittee, and we were all huddled around a computer, so that was a little bit better.
There we go.
There we go.
Much easier.
All right. If you just slide it over to the right, I'll just talk about the different categories. So those different categories that we use to track, and we have categorized these into different drivers for the GMP increases. The biggest line item is city requested improvements to the design. And I always use the example that the example I've used in the past is for when the original design was the original design build contract was proposed. Felance Black and Veatch proposed to access all the tanks by ladder, and so an example of that is they wanted to do an economical design, so you can obviously access tanks by ladder, but operations staff preferred stairs because that makes a lot more sense when you're trying to maintain tanks. So they switched out ladders for stairs, and that cost the city some additional money toward the GMP. The structure of this contract is it's a guaranteed maximum price, but Felance Black and Veatch is actually incentivized to bring the project in under that guaranteed maximum price. And the way that the contract is written is that if they bring it in $4 million, up to $4 million under budget, the city and Felance Black and Veatch split the savings. So they are incentivized to do this. So just because they have a guaranteed maximum price doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to spend all the way up to that limit. But we do budget as though they're going to spend all of the money. So within that budget line item, you always have to remember there's a couple $1 million in there that if Felance Black and Veatch does achieve those savings, that the city gets back in the budget. This is even worse. My apologies for this. So Anvil has received 7 amendments through the overall contract. Tonight, you're in the second item. You're going to be considering the 8th amendment to this. The original contract amount was $31.5 million. Total approved amendments to date was around $3.5 million. And so for the fiscal year 23 budget, there is a I don't know that unless you all have specific questions on that. I don't know if there's any benefit to necessarily zooming in on that. But we have to take, we actually had to take money out of the contingency, which is under the city costs, and transfer it into this to cover the $7,000 budget overrun in fiscal year 23, ending in 23. Next slide. So, finally, a legible slide. The overall development, the development of the fiscal year 24 budget, we had some pretty key objectives. The first one was we wanted to avoid an overall budget increase, and so and we wanted to potentially look for savings within the budget so that we could close out the major construction contracts, hold the line on funding for the recycled water facilities, and then retool some of the administrative and program management costs to cover those. So. We did allocate funding for potential construction claims from Anvil. We reduced the soft cost budget, meaning the design, engineering services during construction and permitting, to reflect the actual. So that was about $117,000. I think it was $177,000 of savings there from what we had budgeted. Because all of those professional services have been completed or contracted, we were able to actually move that money back down into contingency and reduce the soft cost budget. As I said, we wanted to maintain the recycled water facilities budget and then refine the program and city cost budget. So we go through a fair effort to do this. It's in cooperation with utility staff and then our consultant teams. And also with the contractors as well to try to determine what potential change orders are out there. So the design build, the calculations for this, the 23 adopted budget was $79.6 million. We actually, as Director Qualic had indicated, we removed $520,000 for the outfall inspection and cleaning project. We thought we were going to be able to get reimbursed through SRF or for that, but it's actually a permit requirement, so SRF considers that maintenance and not eligible to be reimbursed under this loan. So we had to remove that from the budget.
I want to just mention something here. So we are descoping this and one other portion of the project that we talked about earlier in my presentation. And we're kind of burying the lead here on the wharf, but there is no budget increase requested for the wharf this year. However, we are descoping almost $1 million, about 900 and change from the budget, but we're maintaining the same budget. So I just want to be completely transparent that the costs within the wharf program are going up a little bit, but we've taken out things that aren't compatible with our funding. But the overall program budget's the same. You can take it away, Paul.
Okay. So the proposed budget is with the reduction for the outfall inspection and cleaning. And by the way, the outfall is the pipeline that goes about a mile offshore and discharges the treated wastewater into the ocean. It's about 50 feet deep and a mile offshore. So
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So you're taking it out, but you're putting it back in someplace else?
Yes, in the case of the outfall inspection and cleaning, it'll be
Right.
paid out of the sewer fund.
Right.
In the case of the RO piping modifications, that'll be paid out of the water fund. Those two projects have to happen because our regulators are requiring them, but they can't be funded through the funding mechanisms we have set up for the wharf. We tried to do that, and it just didn't work. So we're taking them out.
But really, they are added to the price of the overall project.
The other aspects of the project that were already in there are going to eat up that 920,000 that were being held by those two
Right, but
projects.
it's
Yeah.
it's an additional expense to the overall project
Yeah, it could be
that-
viewed that way.
that
Yeah.
should be viewed that way, right? I mean, as a person that's paying for it, it should be viewed that way.
Overall, what's coming out, like, overall expenditures are increasing, yes, but for the program itself, they're holding.
Okay, thanks.
So just, I mean, I get, not to put maybe a finer point on that, but just when we're budgeting these, when we budget for this, what we're trying to do is try not to, we then strive to try to hold the line on the budget and not spend the money. It's so that we don't have to keep coming back for budget increases through time. So we held the line on the overall $159.8 million budget. And so we just didn't lower that by that 920,000. So we considered that we moved it to the contingency item and viewed that as a contingency. So the current guaranteed maximum price for, as we developed the budget months ago, was just over $78 million. So there was about $1.1 million remaining in that budget line item. That's headspace between the guaranteed maximum price and what we've allocated in that line item. So the conveyance facilities calculations on this, again, we needed to add some budget for Cogstone Resource Management. The second item tonight, you'll consider an amendment from Cogstone. But then we reduced Waterworks and Kevin Merck budgets to reflect their actual contract amounts, the assumption being that they would spend all that money. That may not necessarily be the case because that project is largely complete now. And so as we actualize this against contract amounts as though the city were going to spend all the money, but when the project is fully closed out and everybody's completed all their work, whatever's remaining in those contracts then would be, we would close the consultant contracts out, and then whatever budget's remaining, we would move that to, in future budget years or mid-year, we might move that into the program contingency. So that's kind of how we work through the different budget line items and cover costs within each one of these categories. So the fiscal year 23 adopted construction budget was $34.7 million. We removed, so that was what was budgeted. Again, as Director Qualick said, we removed $400,000 for the RO piping modifications. Anvil did end up doing some work at Pump Station A, the outside of that building, but we didn't want to go back in and cut the pavement. So those piping modifications underground to accommodate the changes to that facility were done so that we don't have to go back in, the city doesn't have to go back into Pump Station A site and dig up any of that brand new pavement. And so in this particular case, we needed to add $267,000 from program contingency to cover the current contract. Unfortunately, Greg, this bullet was like kind of a hangover from a past. We didn't end up actually budgeting this way. We moved that 1.6 for future change orders into the contingency budget in city costs.
That's correct, because we didn't want to assume that it was going to Anvil, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So the proposed fiscal year 24 budget is $35.568 million for Anvil, and this would close them out. Apologies for the illegible. So the overall budget changes, and in this case, we could zoom in, but the overall budget changes we show in the fiscal year, this is what we wanted to show, is that the city costs, that we're moving money into the city cost line item to cover, to replenish the contingency. And you can see that we've added $667,000 to conveyance here to cover the contract amount. And then the other line items, we had to reduce those budgets in order to balance everything out. And so the negative budget in fiscal year '25, that's the $387,000 is the recycled water facilities. So we've basically said that we've moved that budget from future years because fiscal year '24 will be a big year for recycled water. And Mr. Heimel can chime in on that if there's any questions specifically about recycled water. Next slide. Okay. Any questions or further questions on that budget?
I have one more slide, so maybe I do that and we just ask all the questions. So thank you, Paul. My last slide is just on funding. I thought our system, our ClearGov system, had an interesting way of breaking this down visually. So these are the capital project requests for next fiscal year. Again, $19.5 million. You see that the majority, or a big portion of it at least, is coming out of the sewer fund. I guess that is a majority, or it's very close to it. The sewer fund is at around 50% to pay for those projects. The water fund is up there with almost $4 million. Q&E is in third at $2.25 million. And then you have some development impact fees, general fund, some harbor fund money, et cetera. So just wanted to show that visual and show that the funding sources for these projects are pretty varied. That concludes the presentation. We'd be happy to take questions. I will say that, again, I have City Engineer Eric Ridio here, Utilities Division Manager Damaris Hanson here, Harbor Director Ted Schiaffoni here. We have Dan Heimel here for recycled water questions, and Paul Amico here for general wharf program questions.
Thank you for that extremely in-depth presentation. That's a lot to absorb, a lot of projects, a lot going on. And thank you to the staff, Eric, for all you do, too. Who would like to start? Councilmember Landrum? Fire away.
Okay. One thing I would like to know is, I'm a little unsure of the the 41 in Maine, Highway 1, how that works with, if we're asked to approve that now, how do we, what if council decides later on that they want the option, that the low option, whatever that number you had there was? How does that work? And why are we asked? I mean, it seems like the decision of what we're going to do should come before, budgeting for it.
It's a good question, Councilmember Landrum. It's one that staff discussed today. Mm-hmm. So in the case that in 2 or 3 weeks, the city council decided, for example, we'd like to go with the no-build alternative or the double signal alternative, then we would simply adjust the budget at a later time. We'd adjust the budget document at a later time. I would want to note, though, that this year we're asking for $26,000 in development impact fees, most of which are already earmarked for improvements at this intersection. So we're not this year asking for Q&E, for example. The reason I say that is because it's not that we could do much else with the money that we're requesting this year. So it doesn't really affect other potential capital projects that we could be proposing or more money that we could put on another project. We are holding $1.2 million in Q&E from prior years. That's true for the project. Again, if City Council on June 13th chose to not go with a roundabout, because when we did that commitment with SLOCOG, we wanted to go with the highest cost alternative so that they can hold more money for us. even if we didn't ultimately go with a roundabout, at least we want to hold that just in case we did. So if we don't go with a roundabout and we go with a less expensive alternative, it depends on the alternative what happens. If we go with the double signal, we would still likely need that $2 million that we're, the 1.2 that we're already holding and the 826 that we're requesting to hold for this project. We'd still likely need that for the double signal. If the city council decides to go with the no-build alternative, then yeah, I mean, that money, I don't know the exact mechanism, but I think we would take it at mid-year next year, and that money would then be available for other projects.
Okay, thank you. Okay. All right, and so, I mean, I have a lot of different questions and they're kind of random. One thing is, and this is actually maybe more of a comment, but when I was at the JPIA thing, I learned through another council person from Seal Beach that they were having issues with their trees downtown. And they have ficus trees there. And people in Seal Beach are very passionate about ficus trees, and they want them replaced, even though some of them have roots that go so far as they go into buildings. And so I was just kind of researching that, and I found out that, and this is, you know, kind of too late, but the more you prune a tree, the more the roots grow, or the shallower the roots grow, or something like that. There's just like a science to that, and I was just wondering if, you know, I would hate to see any trees be cut down. They are beautiful, and it would be a shame if we caused that, you know, if we caused that condition to become a hazard and worse. And so I just wanted to put that out there. Let's see. Oh, with the Main Street and 41 sewer replacement, does that have archaeological studies that would need to be required because that area is so sensitive?
It's a great question, Councilmember Landrum. That is a hotbed of cultural resources in that area. I'll kick it to our city engineer to answer.
Eric Ridio, city engineer. Yeah, the answer to the question is likely yes. There would probably need to be monitoring during excavation work. Part of the challenge at Atascadero Road right now is we don't know what the alignment will be. The ideal alignment is actually, you know, where existing infrastructure is. So we would have to look at alternatives for construction, and that's largely why that portion has not been designed. But part of the project moving forward would require some of the environmental to be done. So the cultural being in that area being very significant, it would likely be part of that project. So.
And was that the one that was ready to go like right away?
So the Main Street portion of that has been designed, so that portion could technically go, but it, you know, and it could, we could break it up into two separate projects. It's just the downstream elements need to be replaced as well. So while you're disrupting traffic in the community in the area, it makes sense to just keep going. But those are some things we have yet to determine until we have a design on the other portion. But if we could move forward with one, the Main Street portion, and the other one that is fully designed is the Beachcomber Main. So that one's ready to go to construction.
Okay. I just was wondering if that would affect the price, the archaeological stuff, just because we saw what happened with the with the sewer project.
Yes, the monitoring will require full-time archaeologists to be on site during excavation. So, and it's really hard to predict what that would be. It depends on the extents of the resource. A lot of that information we just don't know. So until you get deep into it, and because it's Caltrans right away, they would have oversight over it as well. So we would be having to work with Caltrans cultural people.
So do you feel that that's a really confident number? Like you're confident with the number that is budgeted with those possibilities?
That number has been in the budget for a number of years, so we refreshed it last year and added some cost escalation because I don't believe that had been done. So does it cover the full scope based on I don't know. It really depends on the type of design. So at this point, we don't know for the Atascadero portion. We'd have to get further in the design to really refine that number. So at this point, I don't see any reason to inflate it anymore because we still don't know enough on that.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, and with the waterways and storm drain plan, is that like when Highway 1 flooded? Is that our responsibility? Does Caltrans have a responsibility there? Is that our responsibility to pay for that plan only?
It's a good question, Councilmember Landrum, and I'll speak to that. I would say this, I won't comment on whose responsibility is in the larger sense, but I would say that if we don't do it, no one will. We could go to Caltrans and ask them to participate in the costs. I suspect that they would say that they are not responsible because their bridge is actually higher than ours. It allows more water to go through it than ours does. Also, our bridge wasn't the cause of the flooding. The cause of the flooding is upstream, and it's really on private property. So if we're talking about responsibility, we'd probably be looking more at private property owners. And because it's not an improved creek, meaning it's not channelized with concrete or anything like that, it's essentially nature. It's a natural creek. And it would be difficult, if not impossible, according to the folks we talked with who have been doing this work for years at the city of SLO, to kind of pin that on a property owner. It doesn't mean that we can't get them to participate financially in some way, but for the plan itself, I'm not so sure, particularly if there's no guarantee that a private property owner's property will see any improvement, if that makes sense. If we're looking at 3 creeks, for example, and we ask a handful of property owners to participate, well, our proposed projects may not even be on their property. So this is one of those situations where it's eeny, meeny, miny, moe. If the city doesn't do anything, nothing will happen. And I think there's a sense, and ultimately this is up to the city council, but there's a sense that the city ought to do something to mitigate these hazards.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to ask, I'll give you a break for a minute. Okay, so now I'm looking, I think this is in the operating budget for the city attorney, and maybe Mr. Newmeyer could answer. There's labor negotiation and project-specific legal services. I was curious what that is. Not the labor negotiation part.
Sure. So there's going to be anticipated costs for dealing with the potential wind farm that's going to be off the coast. And so there'll be extra legal costs for that. There's also going to be anticipated costs that the city's going to be requesting for potential redevelopment of 781 Market Street. And so those two were put in by staff for extra extra legal costs. And then we also have labor negotiations, of course, that periodically occur.
Okay, thank you. I am going to take a break and let someone else. have a
Councilmember
turn.
Barton, questions?
I had a question on the issue of concrete replacement and street tree replacement. And I'm thinking in terms of downtown, we have a lot of eucalyptus trees that have enormous pods. And should you not be watching where you're going and put your foot on one, it scoots. And so to me, it seems like something that's a health and safety thing. And I just wondered if that kind of fits into that project. Is that anything that you're considering, or you're looking at it mostly as a concrete thing?
Good question, Councilmember Barton. We're very aware that the red eucalyptus trees are a hazard and arguably a nuisance. The hard ball things that they drop, I've talked to several people who say they've rolled their ankles on them. The current city policies don't allow the city to go in and remove trees for no reason. One reason that the city can remove a tree is for necessary infrastructure improvements. Sidewalk repairs would be considered a necessary infrastructure improvement because of the hazards that they pose and the liabilities that they expose the city to. And so if we do replace a tree, it would only be because of an infrastructure improvement or because the tree is a hazard or it's dying.
Yeah.
But your point about the red eucalyptus trees is taken. They're beautiful when blooming. There's a lot of history with those trees in the city. But they are tearing up our sidewalks.
I was just Googling Veterans Hall improvements in California, and I just had gotten there when we switched over. So I see here, looks like there was money in grants and donations to work on a Cayucas one, and there was another one when this first came up. So in July of '22, it's talking about that as part of the state budget that there had been money that would go to Central Coast organizations, and I just wondered if we've already done some looking for how are we going to fix this place.
It's a good question. We haven't.
Yeah.
I thought that the Cayucas Vets Hall was at least in part paid for by the county. There may be money out there. If this was an approved project, it's something we would pursue.
Yeah.
In terms of grant funding, we would absolutely pursue grant funding if it's out there. However, there is some, I'll say this though, that my sense is that there is some level of urgency on the audiovisual
Right.
side of the house that would, if there was grant funding out there, maybe we could phase the project. We could do part of the house with the AV and then maybe do the restrooms later or something like that.
That's it for now.
All right, I'm going to go. I would piggyback on the Vets Hall here. I think that, I hope that it's sooner rather than later. And I know some of those, when you talked about Cayucas Vets Hall, that was, it's kind of their hub of their community, and they fundraised in their community along with county funds. But I feel that we are in desperate need, and if the PEG money's there for the audio, that's great, but we need to facilitate it, as you said, altogether, so I welcome that soon. My question is about, well, I have several. The $80,000 for Bonita Street Fire Station, what is the intent? Because that hasn't been brought, we're going to spend $80,000, and is the intent to refurbish that, rehabilitate that, and if so, are we doing that with an intent? Because we haven't heard anything about opening that station. And in the 40 years that I've been part of the fire department group, it hasn't, been used other than basically a storage unit for the last 40 years. So I'm curious why we're putting money in there all of a sudden.
It's a good question, Mayor. I can speak broadly to it. Fortunately, Chief McCrane isn't here, but from what I know of the project, and I have toured the site, the engine bays were totally rehabilitated, I believe, in 2006, and they're actually in outstanding shape. You're right that it is largely being used for storage now, as far as I'm aware. The old engine from, I think, the 1920s or something is
40s.
40s, thank you,
1940s,
is in there, which is really cool. But there's a level of service question with the fire department, and that was really highlighted during these more recent storms when the city, we now know that when it floods, that the city gets cut in half. And when there are emergencies that require EMS response, if our fire engines are downtown, that creates problems for emergency response in North Morro Bay. It's not to say it's impossible, but now we're talking about sending engines through maybe 6 feet of water or sending kayaks across. So I believe the idea behind this project is to have a base of operations for North Morro Bay. More to your question, the bays are in good shape. It's the kind of like little attached house or apartment next to it that's really in terrible shape. I mean, when I was in there, it was like torn up. It's really in bad shape, and that would need to be totally rehabilitated. It has a front room, a restroom, a very small kitchen or kitchenette, and then I think two bedrooms where first responders and folks in the fire department, in the case of emergency, can spend the night if needed to maintain service in an emergency. So the intent was to design out that area that would need to be renovated, and then perhaps seek funding down the road for actually implementing that renovation.
And so I'm a cheerleader for the fire department. Everybody knows that, but I feel like we're putting the cart ahead of the horse because we haven't even had a conversation about whether or not there's a desire by the city as a whole. And I understand the fire department's perspective, but again, I'm going to go back to the fact that in 40 years, before we built this state-of-the-art fire station that we now have, with the exception of this rare storm and the situation, which I totally understand, I don't know what the plan is for it, and I feel like we're spending money without knowing what the plan is and if that's a plan that the city as a whole. So I'm just, it's not like it's a deal breaker, but it's $80,000, and I feel like I would have liked to have had more information about what the goal of that was and how that fits in, considering we have this brand-new fire station. So,
And Mayor, I had, I guess, maybe a more robust conversation with the fire chief because I was curious as well.
yeah,
And he did give me a tour of the facility, and the equipment bay is pretty impressive. The house is not inhabitable. The living quarters are not. So that's the physical situation, but the operational situation is that we are not really meeting our response time objectives for North Morro Bay. And the long-term plan is to staff a North Morro Bay fire station so that we can improve those response times. Whether we increase staffing or not, I think the chief would like to get to the point where, if need be, we just have one engine in North Morro Bay at that station. So his plan is to have plans developed to rehabilitate the living quarters, make them modern and ADA compliant, and then seek grant funding for the actual construction. At the same time, he's pursuing grant funding for additional staffing, which would be helpful. But if we're not successful in getting the additional staffing, he would be looking at a plan to potentially just have an engine in one engine in North Morro Bay and one engine at the main fire station.
Weren't they impact fees too that were specifically for the fire department that were being used for that? that money, that 80,000?
Yes, the proposed funding source is fire-specific development impact fees, and those must be used for capacity enhancements that have a correlation with the impact of new development.
thank you for that. And so it wouldn't go beyond that, I'm guessing, until we would hear about something before money being allocated for that. And I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. I also know this has been a desire for 40 years, and it hasn't come to fruition yet. So I just am cautious that we're spending money, whether it's this impact money or money after it, for what we might or might not have for staffing. I'll move on. The $40,000 for the North T-Pier, is that for, I mean, we have 1.5 million. Are we not moving forward at all with any electrical replacements or any of those things on the pier?
My understanding is, and I'll kick it over to Director Schiaffoni. My understanding is that we need to have an understanding of the work we're going to do before we jump into the replacement work, and that's what the 40,000 would be for scoping. But if you want to jump in.
Mayor Wixom, yes, thank you for the question. So in order to actually release the grant funds, we have to provide a scope of work, we have to provide a timetable, and we have to provide estimated costs. So we have to spend this money in advance before we can free up the $1.5 million to actually move forward with the
Thank you.
funding.
Thank you for that. The 135,000 for the decommissioning wastewater treatment plant for the $9 million. Did we get the appraisal in on that yet? On the value of the property and everything?
No.
Okay.
Well, where does the 9 million come from?
It's an estimate that's based on a formula that was done, I don't know, maybe a year ago. It also roughly falls within the, I believe we did get a bid item, Paul, for decommissioning from Anvil for, what was it, 5 million? It was not decommissioning, but demolition of the plant, the old plant.
It was actually part of the design build proposals. So there was a line item in the design build proposals, but they were wildly different. Phelon's Black and Veatch, I think, was around 5 million, if I remember. I can get that number. I've got the contract.
So at the time, I believe we thought that was very low.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And then the other team bid, they weren't even close. They were drastically low. So
Yeah, so we did have some data to work with, but we put together a formula that projected out what those costs would be.
And is that all of our responsibility of the, our percentage of the costs?
My understanding is that some of that would be in for negotiation with Cayuga Sanitary District.
So it's a pretty loose number, the
It
9
is.
million. Okay, thanks. Sorry to jump in
That's
on that
okay,
one. That was
thank
one of
you.
my questions too.
Thank you. On that? On that? Oh, I have more. Thank you. The $200,000 for the safety implementation plan, do you know what the shelf life is on that? I mean, how long is that plan good for approximately? A year, 3 years, 5 years?
That's a good question. I don't know if there's a actual shelf life. There are, what the LRSP targets are different pots of money. HSIP, which is Highway Safety Improvement Program, and then this other program called Safe Streets for All. In order to even apply for those grants, you need an LRSP plan. It is mandated. So those cycles run every 2 years. So I would imagine we would apply for those and see how competitive we are to get those grants. But usually, I mean, with those type of documents, probably at least 5 years, but I'd say probably closer to 10 for our city, because it is a big undertaking for our city. So.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate that. The one water plan update, the 190,000, is that done in-house? Is that a contract study? How is that done?
That would be done by a consultant.
Okay, thank you. Coleman Park, is that 292,000 grants that is in there for that?
It's a mix. There's some grant money in there. There's also some, I don't want to say it wrong, I think it's park in lieu fee money.
Okay, thank you. And I think I'll leave my Highway 41 questions till the 13th on consultant fees and where additional funding would come from if it was Measure Q or somewhere. The engineer you want to, that you have budgeted in, you said 25% of the allocation comes from harbor? Measure Q, harbor, water and sewer?
I'm sorry, so Sarah's giving me some hand signals. It looks like 10% from harbor, 25 from CUNY.
It's
you wanna go
actually 25% from water, 25% from sewer, 10% from harbor, and 40% from Q&E. And then that would be reevaluated and adjusted annually depending on the projects that the person was going to be working on during that year.
So my question on that was why 40% from Q&E? Why so high out of that fund?
I'll take that question. Thank you for the question, Mayor. Part of it is just the realities of where the harbor fund, water fund, and sewer fund are as they're being projected out. Harbor fund doesn't have a whole lot of balance to play with. The water and sewer funds, because they are bearing the brunt of some of these big capital projects, it wouldn't be very sustainable to put heavier allocations into those funds. But also because what this engineer would be working on in many cases is not harbor projects or sewer projects or water projects. It's other projects like roadways and sidewalks and that kind of thing.
Thank you. That's what I was thinking, but I just wasn't sure, so I wanted to find out. The outfall inspection and cleaning is over $500,000. Is that an estimate, or do we know that for a fact? That seems really expensive.
Bring up Paul for that one.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the outfall, that's an estimate that was generated. We got an inspection done. A diver went and looked at that. The external did an external inspection of that, and then had given us an estimate for what that cleaning would cost. And then I believe that was escalated to midpoint of construction, which we would have assumed was this next year. So that's an actual estimate from a diver.
And so we haven't had it done, or you said it was 10, never? So
It was not done. The outfall it needed to be modeled for the discharge permit. And so we had a diver go and look at that from the outside and look at all the diffusers to make sure they were operational. And so they did a report based on that, and they also attempted to run a camera down through it. But I don't believe they were able to get a good portion of it because it was impacted by silt and sand.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks. It just seemed really high, so I was trying to understand what that all was. So,
It's
okay.
quite an endeavor to get it done. It's
Yeah. I know it's specific for something like that with the divers, but
Yeah,
it just
exactly.
still seems like a really high number. So, thank you. I'm good. I'll pass it down.
Can I circle back to the hall? I found one that got funded this year.
Yes.
Okay. I kept looking, and I found an article about the Corning, which is in way northern California, Veterans Memorial Hall rehabilitation. They got funded this year for $2 million. The project is to rehabilitate the Memorial Hall, which was constructed in 1931. I don't know exactly what this one is, but it's probably similar. And part of the reason for that was for veterans to continue to have a meeting place and the general public to have access to a common meeting point, providing full benefit to the entire town, which sounds very much like us. Let's see, the work will also include restoration of walls, windows, and floors to their previous condition, as well as renovation to the building's kitchen and restrooms. So this was coming as a press release from the congressman in that area, Mr. LaMalfa. So anyway, press release from January of this year. So,
I appreciate you bringing that to our attention. We'll look into it.
It just popped up, so. Thank you. Yeah.
So I just wanted to bring some information that I got from the CFAC meeting with regard to Bonita Street. And this was what Chief McCrane gave at the podium that day, that the $80,000 for the Bonita Fire Station, it was a project that was looked at, the design remodel in 2004. It was identified at that time, and there was a plan now to still use the house for the crew because it was deemed necessary during the storm. So that's kind of what, in a nutshell, he said.
The chief did wrap up his training, EOC training in Paso Robles, and we actually have him on Zoom if you have any additional
Oh.
questions for him.
I can reach out to him.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, I just wanted to give that.
Thank you, and thank you for that, Mr. Carpenter.
Also, just a comment, I'm hearing a through line pretty much where, we have to spend money to make money to get grants. I think that's the thing that I'm repeatedly hearing. Spend money to make money. Heard that many times. And one of the questions, I don't know if this would be for, actually, probably Mr. Kwolek or Eric. I noticed that I'm just trying to understand when a Southern California gas company rep doesn't, show up at, when they're supposed to. I saw it so many times. I mean, it was like $43,000 and it was another $20,000. And I'm just wondering, do we have any recourse with another agency not meeting the job?
In lieu of me making a snarky answer,
I knew it was coming.
I'll kick it to Paul.
I'll give the the answer I have. I've answered this before in the past, actually. Yeah, the city is on the hook for, unfortunately, within the general conditions, that is a compensable event for the contractor. If they have scheduled them, and we could certainly try to pursue SoCalGas for those charges, but it would be, I would just say, we're good luck. I mean, they're probably, they would tell us to go away.
But, so it's common.
It is
It seems like a very common thing.
Yeah, it was unfortunate. The pipeline alignment very closely followed the high pressure gas main that runs down Quintana, and so there was a big portion of the alignment that they had to schedule the standby, the observer, if you will, and so it was a situation that we had to manage pretty carefully for a while because there was a lot of finger pointing between Anvil and SoCalGas around that. And so SoCalGas actually had a number of complaints about Anvil also not doing what they said they were going to do on any given day. So it was just an unfortunate circumstance. We were with them for quite a bit of that alignment, and it was kind of a hair-pulling situation on both sides.
And it kind of brings me to another question. You get a water line breach and, whose fault is it? Anvil's, is it, what part is the city's responsibility? And then how does reimbursement work?
So you mean reimbursement from?
Yeah, so the city has to pay for that in the immediate time while we're trying to figure out whose fault it was.
Right. A lot of times if I think I'm understanding your question correctly, is how do we account for, or how do we back bill, if you will, Anvil for city incurred charges because of their act or omission, right, is how we kind of say it. A lot of times what we do with that information is we use it in a broader negotiation of change orders. So they may have certain change orders that they're pursuing us for. We show them charges that we have, and so we say, well, look at all these charges we have for you. Why don't you just make this one go away? Because it is a lot of give and take and a balance, and these negotiations are the contract even contemplates that there are going to be differences in opinion between the engineer and the contractor. And we do our best to negotiate those in a fair manner, and sometimes it's clear cut and other times it's pretty gray. So
Thank you. Mr. Kwolek, we mentioned SLOCOG's funds that were, I guess they're sitting or put over in a fund. I'm not sure how it works exactly for the Highway 41 project. And there was a mention of a ICE study. Is the amount of money that we currently have set aside based on that study? I want to say you said ICE.
Thank you for your question. I'll kind of rebuild the answer in my own way, and hopefully I'm answering your question. There was a project estimate at some point that was made that was around $8.5 million for what the project would cost. And I believe that project estimate is probably 4 years old or maybe older. Does that sound right? older. And so the way we've looked at funding out that project is based on that estimate, because that's the most recent estimate we have. So in terms of the money that we have committed, which is to your question, we looked at what Measure Q&E had capacity for. Because remember, when we first committed funds from Q&E to the 141 Main Street Improvements Project, at least the east side of Q&E was very new, and we weren't really sure how much revenue was going to come out of it. So we decided to put $600,000 per year for 4 years to bring us to $2.4 million. SLOCOG had been holding $5.9 million for us for a long time, and they were becoming a little impatient. They didn't see project progress because we were in a very slow environmental phase of the project. They noticed that the city hadn't committed any of our own funds, and they wondered, is this a project that might just die out? And if so, why are we holding money for the city of Morro Bay? So the commitment, the financial commitment that the city made was really to keep SLOCOG's money in play.
Thank you, that's great.
I can speak to the ice. So that,
Thank you.
yeah, it's a intersection control evaluation. It doesn't really look at funding. It's just how the intersection functions, traffic counts, and the different pattern. And that's where it actually looks at the different alternatives, and then projects based on those alternatives what the level service would be. So that's it, but it doesn't look at the funding. So.
Yeah, I just kind of confused that. Thank you for clarification. Talking about the Morro Bay wells, I'm just curious how we go about, we know that they're 67-odd-year-old, and we know that they're not reliant. Why don't we prioritize something like that before we get a larger project going? I'm just curious why we wouldn't have looked at the wells and the age that they're at and said, hey, we probably should do this first, or, how we prioritize that.
It's a good question, Councilmember Edwards. I'll speak at a high level to it. The one take on it is that the wells have worked until, I want to say, last year, when one of them was kicking up sand, which scared staff, and then it became a priority. I would argue that it is a priority. That's why we're presenting it in next fiscal year's budget. So we want to get moving on that project, because I wouldn't say we're scared now, because that well is now producing water. I'm looking at the mayor.
Yeah, yes, it is now producing water.
So there are many reasons why a well could be kicking up dirt, and we assume the worst, as we should, because we want to be cautious. But yeah, I mean, we want to get moving on that project. It's long overdue.
Thank you. Paul, this is back to you. I probably should know this, but I just wanted, you were talking about non-reimbursed items.
Right.
What are examples of those? What kinds of things would those be? Things that you cannot get reimbursed for?
You mean under the funding agreement, the state revolving fund, the outfall inspection and cleaning is viewed as a maintenance activity, not as a capital project. So it's not directly related to the project description and the construction of the water reclamation facility or the pipelines. The outfall was existing and it needs to be maintained. And it's a permit requirement. So that those types of activities aren't reimbursable under the SRF agreement.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm done for now.
All right, one of the benefits of going last. I only have a few questions remaining. So one of my questions is regarding the storm drain assessment. So I guess this question is for Mr. Kwolek or Mr. Ridio. I know that when we were out and about and looking at the storm drains and talking about potential issues in the future with some of those that are, going under homes and areas where we can't really inspect without cameras and that sort of thing. And is that part of what we're planning on doing in the next year? Are we assessing all the storm drains, or are we just planning on repairing the ones that we already know about, and then we'll worry about the rest later? But can you explain that a little bit more in depth for me, please?
Thank you for the question. I'll speak to kind of the plan at this point. We're in process of executing a contract with assessing a handful of the storm drains that we know have visible failures, that we've seen sinkholes develop, and ones we haven't replaced already, like the one on our Embarcadero obviously was replaced right after we saw the sinkhole develop. So there are a few of those. We're also targeting the Main Street area that flooded, Preston Lane, Main, the storm drains there by the highway. I was actually looking at our One Water plan, and it does call out for those to be upsized. So we're going to inspect them, and likely that would be some of the first ones that we look at replacing. And then speaking to what Director Kwolek mentioned earlier, we submitted a hazard mitigation grant, which would seek to get reimbursed for those. So, but we do know that we need to spend some money on some of those that are already failing. So assessment would be part of it. But yeah, to your point, it may not make sense to assess completely everything. Maybe it does, but let's assess some that we know are the biggest problems right now and get those fixed as a priority.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I gotta look and see which ones didn't get answered here. I do have a question about, this is just out of curiosity, the Public Works Inspector that does the inspections and kind of is there periodically during a project, are they also responsible for the final inspections and the completion and making sure everything was done to the original plan that was approved? And if there's any major differences, like how is that approached? Let's say a developer, sorry, let me back up a little bit. I know you want to answer me and I'm just keep going. But I know there's been times where projects were completed and they weren't exactly what Planning Commission had thought maybe would be the final product and that sort of thing when they were going through the process. And so if you could explain to me how that process works and what are the repercussions for a project that may have gone a little off on their design.
Sure. That's a great question. This position is, as Greg mentioned, it's an acting position. We're looking to make it an actual position. The person in the role was in the maintenance division, and now that we're doing inspections, his experience, he had a lot of experience in construction, so I've been working a lot with him to train him on inspection. Most of that being in the development area and encroachment permits. So you speak to Planning Commission, development projects where that affect the public infrastructure, whether it be adding frontage improvements, sidewalk, curb and gutter, whether it be tying into utilities and inspecting those tie-ins. This position, those encroachment permits, that's the dominant part of this position. The 25% that we were describing for for capital projects. It could likely be another full-time position, and because of that, we have to consult out the more specialized portions of the inspection. So whether there be testing, a lot of these projects involve a lot of paperwork, submittal review. I review a lot of submittals, but there's times when I can't review all the submittals, so we have to hire someone who's, has an engineering background to review those. It might not be the best, but those are things that I'm trying to work with the inspector to do. And then, yes, as far as completion and looking at plans and making sure that things match, yes, the inspector does that, but we also have the consultant there. We like to use our own forces as much as possible, so that we're not paying a consultant to travel, and so that, in fact, a good example of that is the transit hub. We're going to be actually not utilizing all of our consultant expenses budgeted for the construction portion with that, because we did use our inspector a little more than, and it's very close to the office, so he was able to get over there to, watch him pouring concrete instead of the consultant coming out and doing that, or so those are things we're going to continue to work on.
So do you think that if we were to have that inspector full-time, that it could save us money from the consulting in the long run? Or is that something we consider in the future, or?
So
No?
at this point,
Yes, no?
I think the 25% is really the only amount that we can, there's so many jobs with encroachment permit and development work going on, and all these utility companies always cut into our roadways, that that's consuming about 75% of his time already. So the public works, if we decide, to go under construction on, we're under construction on 4 different projects right now. If we actually want to increase that and take on more, then we would have to add more staff if we want to do internal inspection. So.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate it. I have a question regarding the harbor vehicle. Just kind of a broad question. Something that we haven't really talked about as a city, or as a council, is electrifying our vehicles, our fleets. And I'm just curious. I know that it would be a lot more expensive, of course, for this one vehicle. It's not really in the budget right now to just go buy an electric vehicle for this purpose. But understanding that there's a lot of grant funding and that sort of thing out there for electrifying our fleets, I just want to kind of put it out there that I think that, I would love for us to at least have that goal in mind at some point, to start looking in that direction.
Councilmember Ford, that's a great idea, good question. I think some research would need to take a look at the salt environment and the fact that we are at and near the water, and how that would play into those vehicles being used on the beach.
It's good input. Thank you.
I believe there may be a Senate or Assembly bill being discussed that would require municipalities to electrify by a certain year. I don't know if
Yeah.
it's going to pass, but I think
I wonder if there's any waivers or any, if there is an issue with the corrosion. Okay. I do have a question regarding the wear and tear of our streets when we have construction going on, and I'm just curious if one of you could explain to me if we pass along any of that costs onto the developers who are doing construction, whether it be a capital project or even a smaller project. I know that the wharf we did, a little bit we were thinking about with Quintana, but I'm just curious in general, do we build that into any sort of costs, knowing that our streets are going to have extra wear during that time?
Well, thank you for the question, Councilmember Ford. we will now. I don't know, I can't speak to past projects, but I know that the Beachcomber Main, I'll just use that one as an example, a good portion of the cost of that project is to reinforce the slope because it's right next to the state park and the slope is having some issues, and redoing the roadway. So a lot of projects just focus on the trench and maybe a foot on either side, but I think we would look at, future projects, opportunities to go more and restore the roadway while we're there to minimize disruption. As far as development projects, I think through history, maybe we haven't been doing the best job with that. You can see utility cuts that are sinking. You can see, developments that put in curb gutter sidewalk and the patch back is just falling apart. So those are things that I noticed when I first came here, that it's an indication of not having inspection. So we're not having adequate inspection. So I think that's something we're prioritizing now, is that we need to be watching that. And our inspector is really good with detail and has done a good job in making sure that that investment gets protected. And it also comes down to conditions on development. If we have a larger development, one of the things that I noticed we'll just use the new hotel, the Hampton, is it would have been nice to have them kind of improve up to the center line of the roadway. Well, that wasn't a condition of the development, and it's too late now, but we would have been able to, potentially get that improved while they're there doing the project. So those things need to be negotiated, but I think it's our duty to, when there is development that impacts the roadway, we need to make sure that any construction activity impacts get mitigated, and we look to taking care of it at that time.
I think that's a great idea. Thank you, Mr. Ridio. Sorry, just look through here one more time, make sure I'm not missing anything. Did I miss it? And I apologize if I did. Did anyone answer Mr. Heller's question about if it's possible to get the cost per acre for future recycled water? I know he had a tight 30-day, window, but I'm just curious, if there is a way to get that estimated
Thank you,
amount.
Councilmember Ford, for bringing that up. Yes, that question did come through email, and he also, former Councilmember Heller did make that public comment earlier, and we did not answer that question. I'll take a stab at it. Yes, we could come up with an estimate in 30 days. It wouldn't be very accurate. So we want to avoid duplication of work when we can. That just is extra cost. We now have a draft basis of design report for the recycled water portion of the WRF program. Once that is finalized, as I've been talking to the project manager, Dan Heimel, of that project, we'd like to come up with a couple of different options for implementation. There may be a way to phase that project where we do the bare minimum required by our regulators and funders, and then have a later phase where we can maximize available recycled water. So if we do that, the cost of recycled water per acre foot would be dramatically different than if we just, for example, put in 4 wells, 4 extraction or 4 injection wells. We don't have enough, in short, we don't have enough project definition at this time, in my opinion, for us to go through the expense of making that calculation.
Okay, thank you. Back to the amount that was set, or that we're wanting to spend on trash cans. Is that including the extra, the plan that you're wanting to come up with that's similar to Cambria? Is that just covering the trash cans themselves, or is that also covering the expense that it would take to cover them and then make them and beautify them and that sort of thing? Or is that another expense that we'll have to look at later?
It's a good question, Councilmember Ford. We are hoping to work with community partners on the flora that would be installed above those cans. We think $60,000 gives us some flexibility. As simple as it sounds, to put a tray on top of a trash can that allows for drainage, and then to like get that drained water that would be sitting in the soil on top of a trash can to the right place. I mean, we really actually have to design these things pretty well. And so there are going to be some unknown costs, but what we anticipate is that most of that $60,000 would go into the materials to build the cans themselves.
Okay, so you're building them from, well, we haven't seen the plan that you would like to present eventually, which I'm excited to see. But, okay, so we're actually going to construct the bins. They're not like pre-made and then we just cover them and make them pretty. This is like from scratch.
That's my hope.
Okay.
And, I mean, we'll have to make a few dozen of these. If you just look at a pricing for a pair of your standard urban metal cans for trash and recycling, it's like $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. We have a lot of trash cans along the Embarcadero and in the downtown. I want to say it's somewhere between 30 and 40. If you multiply that, let's say, by $4,000, you're talking about a very big project for not very attractive cans. And that's why we're hoping to make this into a fun community project. I've been talking about it for about a year and a half. The project has had its ups and downs, and it's been deprioritized because we've been working on some bigger things. But we've got some momentum now because we're very close to having a completed prototype. And we also do have a group of volunteers from a local church that's interested in helping out. So I look forward to bringing more information about that in the future.
Thank you. I actually had spoken with Janine Burlingame a long time ago when I was researching how much it was the cost of purchasing new trash cans, and I was just looking at 2 regular trash cans, and when I found out how much, my jaw dropped. And then she said, by the way, we need to replace all of our recycling as well. And I'm going, okay. So I know like the Friends of the Harbor Department kicked in, I think, some money to purchase a few trash cans, and that was a lot of money. So I think this is a worthy cause. So thank you. I think I'm going to withhold all my other questions for now. So I think that's it. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I like the idea of a beautification project that incorporates public-private. Well done. I mean, it's just a good thing to get everybody on board and help with some cost. Any other questions back down this way?
I do have some more.
Thank you.
I would like to know the first item on here for $80,000. So that was we're updating something that was done 11 years ago, correct? Am I understanding this right? And in updating it, the 11-year-old, is it a plan? Nothing still will be done for at least 3 years after that. If I read it right.
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Landrum. I know we did discuss this a bit at the council meeting yesterday, but the prior plan isn't exactly the same. It predates the active transportation program that the state has. So we would want to develop a plan that targets that program for that set of grant funding, because that grant funding has multiple cycles that we'd want to take advantage of. Your question about whether we'd see things in 3 years, maybe. If we can get a plan done in, let's say, a year, then we've got to start applying for grants. And that can take some time. We'd want to align ourselves with the ATP cycle. And then if we got a grant, then it would be part of some existing project we already have, or potentially a new project. So I'd say that we could see a ATP funded project, assuming we were awarded an ATP grant, possibly as soon as a year and a half, but as long as 3 years from now, yeah.
And this would be for a bike path or a pedestrian plan? Is what you're
Active
saying?
transportation includes both.
Okay. And, okay, I wanted to know if it's guaranteed that the slow cog money the amount quoted is, it might have already been answered tonight, but I just wanted to clarify that that is guaranteed.
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Landrum. I would never characterize a funding source as guaranteed until we cash the check. I will say that they've committed $5.9 million towards a roundabout when the city was considering that as really the only option for the intersection. We've since opened up to look at other alternatives. That said, I know that they are looking for progress on this project, and it would be not that difficult for SLOCOG to rescind their commitment. I would hope that they do not. I don't believe that they have plans to do that, but it's not impossible for them to do that. And of course, if the city were to direct staff to pursue a double signal alternative, SLOCOG has already told us that we would not get the full 5.9 million. We'd get proportionately less, proportionate to the total cost of the project. And even that was a verbal commitment. I don't believe the SLOCOG board ever voted on that. So that's more something that the SLOCOG staff would advocate for on our behalf. So to answer your question, is it guaranteed? No, but they've made the commitment.
Okay, thank you. All right. Can you tell me, I think I had sent you this, but can you tell me why it's with the more computerized wastewater, and maybe this is Damaris, I'm not sure, the computerized wastewater treatment plant versus our old plant, which was more labor intensive, why we don't see a savings there?
That's a good question, Councilmember Landrum, and I did see a couple of those questions fly into the inbox. I'll take a stab at it, and if Utilities Division Manager Hanson wants to add to it, she can, but the previous Utilities Division Manager did add, I believe, one additional position in anticipation of operating the new plant, and that position had to do with more of a specialized role for all of the electronic controls that our new plant makes available. It's a more sophisticated plant and requires a more specialized role to do that. Luckily, we were able to promote someone internally who had those skills, but we did add one position in anticipation of the new plant. We're not reducing staff because while the plant does create more efficiencies from an operational standpoint, we have a lot more infrastructure now to maintain. We've added pump stations, lift stations, 3.5 miles of pipeline, and we already have aging infrastructure. There's plenty of work to go around for our folks on the ground. I would add that, operation of the plant is not all that crew does. So we have folks on our crew who focus on water, folks who focus on our collection system, that's all of our sewer lines, and then a handful of folks who are more dedicated to the plant. All of them have certs, almost all of them have certs where they can jump into any project, water, collections, or plant, but we do have areas of focus. And so when we're talking about the employees that are focused on the plant, I would say it's 5 or 6.
Yeah, typically around 4 each day.
4. So, we have to consider things like coverage to make sure that someone's running the plant. So if it was possible to reduce the number of FTEs to effectively operate the utilities division, that's certainly something we would recommend. And again, it is true that some efficiencies were created, but we also added more infrastructure to maintain. So it's worked out to be a wash.
Thank you. Okay, when was Lila Kaiser, the lot there, last done? What year? Do you know?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Landrum. I tried to research that since receiving your question in email, and I don't have an answer. I do believe there was a slurry seal done within the last 5 or 6 years, but I could be wrong. Now, a slurry seal is just basically putting a surface over what's existing, and doesn't really fix the root of the problem, which there's major pavement failure of this. I don't even know how thick the asphalt is. I want to say it's less than 2 inches thick, but there's areas that are completely there's, and it didn't get any better with the flooding as well. But yeah, so I'm not sure when it was constructed or if it was redone, but there was a slurry seal done fairly recently, which is kind of a Band-Aid. It doesn't really add any life to the pavement.
And staff can take a look in between now and the next meeting about the budget, see if we can get a better answer.
I just was wondering because, if we do redo it, we should make sure that, is there some kind of use that's making it degrade in certain areas? Or is there something that we don't know that's happening there that is causing problems or?
Well, yeah, the structural.
It's just that's all
it's
it
bad.
is.
And,
Okay.
I think similar to a lot of our roadways, you have the regular solid waste and recycle vehicles that come, the trucks come there, and that's where I've seen a lot of the failures is right there where they do their pickup. When they turn the wheels, it just destroys the pavement. So that doesn't help having heavier vehicles in the parking lot. Heavy vehicles.
We should just get rid of all those garbage trucks, huh? They're beating up our streets. Thank you. Okay, and then regarding the Coleman Beach thing, am I reading that one right, where the total cost is $2 million for a bathroom? That can't be right.
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Landrum. I don't have that pulled up right now, but no, we think the bathroom is going to be somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000, depending on the design. Staff in late 2021 did a public outreach campaign to try to understand what the community was interested in seeing at Coleman Park, what sorts of improvements, and a lot came up. So some amenities were recommended, some cultural amenities. There's potentially a plaza that might go in there. Again, all of this would be up to City Council when we bring it forward. It's nothing concrete has been decided on, but it was very clear that some folks wanted like adult active workout equipment there. We also have requests from the Coastal Commission to habitat restoration there. So that as we look at expanding Coleman Park there and the footprint of the park itself, potentially removing the basketball courts to put something more attractive and modern there, and then even involving the tribes and putting together some cultural story boards or possibly even monuments, the cost of the project goes up.
Okay, I'm just relieved that it wasn't $2 million for the bathroom. And can you help me understand there's a store in the bathroom? Is that or some kind of a booth that sells things?
We're leaving open the option to include a concession stand as part of the bathroom building. That doesn't necessarily mean that's what we're going to do. I can see from the look of your face, it doesn't sound very appealing. For what it's worth, the town I grew up in had one in a park. Doesn't say much, but depending on how big the restroom is and where everything's facing, it could make sense.
Thank you. Okay. regarding the water tank, the $18 million water tank, I can't think of the street. Nutmeg. That, that and, well, first of all, with that, have we, it was really made it apparent to me why we, did everything twice at the new sewer site for redundancy. And to me, that sounds like we're doing the opposite of that. And it seems like kind of like you're putting all your eggs in one basket. And is it not better to have more smaller tanks? And would that be less expensive?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Landrum. I see where you're going. If we think about water tanks as being for capacity, in other words, storage capacity, then I understand where you're coming from there, but the main driver for that project, at least for the tank, and I would not characterize it as an $18 million tank. There's a lot of different components that comprise a bigger project, and the tank is the bigger component of it. But that is really about water pressure and fire flow. And in order to have the fire flow that's necessary by regulations to be supplied to Del Mar Elementary School, we need to expand the size of that tank. For what it's worth, we're also toying with alternative locations altogether, as well as some grant funding opportunities for that project that could drastically cut the costs to the city water fund for that project. I want to emphasize that we're still in an early phase there, and there's still some options to figure things out.
And for some of those tanks, I know one you said failed. Have we considered relining the others, and also relining sewer dirt pipes and that haven't completely failed, rather than replacing them? Because is that cheaper? Is that a more economical thing to do?
So relining anything when appropriate is going to be cheaper than an emergency situation where we have something, open up. Relining the tank was not an option because it has a crack alongside of it, and it's a dangerous situation that's unfortunately not correctable. That's at the Elena tank. So we had to decommission that one. We'll always be looking at cost-effective alternatives to extend the life of our infrastructure, including our sewer lines. If relining is an option for some of our infrastructure, we'd be looking at that.
Okay, because you kept saying replacing, and I just wanted to make sure.
Could I?
I wanted to know if we were considering also relining.
Could I interject? Yeah, as far as relining, we're actually in the middle of a project right now where we're recoding our major water supply tanks. Both King's tanks, one of them has already been recoded, and then both Blanca welded steel tanks have been recoded just recently. And then we have two welded or bolted steel tanks that are being rehabbed as well. They're actually being replaced. And also we're doing massive foundation work on them for seismic. So, yeah, if that was a major undertaking for the city, that's a almost $3 million project for recoding those tanks. So.
Wow. But I bet replacing them is so much more.
Absolutely.
I'll add too that the sewer line replacements are typically also to add capacity. So lining wouldn't allow us to do that.
Oh, okay, good. I had forgotten my last, or I think it's my last question. I don't promise. But you just reminded me. So regarding capacity and the One Water plan and what we're working off, the numbers that we're working off, Morro Bay, I read recently, lost a percentage of population. So are we sure we need to size up to those numbers? I mean, I don't know.
It's a good question, Councilmember Landrum. I'll answer that in two ways. In the 2020 census, we gained around 500, at least on the census count. In terms of, do we need to, so the controlling document in this case for what build-out is for the city is the general plan. And the general plan goes through an extensive public engagement process that where Scott Graham here, he could talk about. That was something that really had a lot of community input and was based on calculations and formulas that, frankly, the Utilities Division doesn't get involved in. We will follow what the general plan says. That's our responsibility. If there's a projection that the city is going to decrease in size, then that's how we would build out our infrastructure. If there's a projection that the city would double in size, we'd build out our infrastructure in that way. But the general plan is the controlling document for that.
Okay. And then I guess I just have a comment on the the number one. What was that? I keep the active, yeah, and then the other one that's kind of similar. Yeah, what'd you call it? Yes, thank you. Having grown up here, the intersection that you're talking about, where you want to put the crosswalk by the police station. I grew up over by the golf course over there, and there used to be a 7-Eleven right there on the corner where that Shell station I think now is, and so we would walk down to I would walk to school, so I walked all over this town, and it was really easy to cross the street there, and I just will bring it to everyone's attention that possibly it's more difficult because that roundabout is there now, and maybe that's causing the danger in crossing the street, because it really was never, kids could easily cross that intersection, actually any intersection in town. So I won't date myself by saying we were walking to Thrifty's to get an ice cream, but yeah, it just seems like to spend all of that money on doing studies to really have to get around a town that's like 10 square miles. It's pretty easy overall to get around it. I don't know, that just seems like, I don't know, kind of a lot to overkill, I guess.
I'd like to respond if I may.
Sure.
And I think that's an interesting observation about the roundabout. I want to make a distinction between studies and plans. So studies, and I've heard them referred to interchangeably here in CFAC and for members of the public. So studies are when we're hiring someone to do some kind of close examination of an issue, and they may make recommendations to the city. So for example, a parking study, we have a parking specialist consultant that is doing a very specialized evaluation of an issue and giving the city recommendations. A plan is a bit different. Plans may involve studies, but a plan is a document that is produced with public engagement and public input that then stands as a statement about something that the city wants to do. In other words, if we have an active transportation plan, everything that's in that plan is a statement to the world, and by the world I mean grant funders, that the city of Morro Bay says we want to do these things, that we take these things seriously, and that we are going to pursue these things. A study doesn't necessarily do that. And I make that distinction because I think there's a sense out there that the city does some studies and puts them on a shelf. A plan allows us to access grant money. A plan allows us to publicly prioritize projects. And I think that staff believes that there's value in that. And those are things that a study wouldn't offer. So I just wanted to make that distinction.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else from you, Councilmember Barton? You good?
No.
I'm good. I think Councilmember Edwards wanted to add something real quick.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what Councilmember Ford was talking about earlier, and I think it was mentioned, Mr. Qualick, during CFAC, and it was with regard to, we do not have an on-call repair program, correct?
Repair program for?
Streets.
Correct. We have city staff who can do pothole repairs and then can do smaller hot mix asphalt repairs. I wouldn't call them on call. We have to schedule out the work and they have to not do other things. So we try to do that once a week. Yeah.
Thank you. So if we're good, this is a receive, and it will be back to us for June 13th. And I think from all of us to all of you, thank you for all your hard work. Is there anything you want to add? I see something over there.
We did want some clarity on the CFAC recommendation.
Oh, thank you. We do need some clarity on the CFAC recommendation. See, and I thought we were going to take a break. No, we'll get this, I'm sorry. So there were, do you want to cue that up?
There it is. Can you get, she's
Can we get the slide up? Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Were you looking for a reminder of the CFAC recommendation? Okay. I'm not sure if we have the slide deck handy, but I can just give you a verbal reminder if we can start with that. So CFAC's recommendation was to remove 5 items totaling $1.3 million from the proposed Q&E budget. And those 5 items were the Harbor Patrol Response Vehicle, the Active Transportation Plan funding, the Local Road Safety Plan implementation funding, sidewalk improvement and street tree replacement funding, and a reduction in the pavement management funding, a reduction of $840,000.
Thank you. Questions? Questions? We're all trying to queue it up on
Sorry.
right now, sorry. Page 25, I know that from yesterday. Mm-hmm.
While we're pulling that up, I think staff does want to know if any of the council members have any changes or deletions that they would like to make, alterations to the capital plan, that we'd like to discuss those tonight so we can come on the 13th with as complete of a budget document as possible.
Thank you.
No, that's where I am.
Sorry, we're struggling to find it.
Yeah.
I don't have anything I want to pull, so I'll just leave it at that. If anyone else does, I'll let you weigh in, but I don't have anything I want to pull. And you're not asking, Mr. Carpenter, just to clarify, or Ms. Johnson Rios, just to clarify, do you need reason why we're not pulling, or are we just?
No,
Like,
I think what we're looking for is direction on the proposed budget before you, including but not limited to CFAC's recommendation. So if there are any changes at all to the proposed budget, operating or capital, we would need that information tonight so that we have time to incorporate that into the final budget that comes back to you in June.
Okay.
Thank you for pulling that up. Sorry, didn't mean to put you on the spot there. So questions or comments on, or recommendations on the CFAC input? And I'll just start, I appreciate, as always, the work that's done by our advisory boards. And I know Councilmember Edwards was there as a liaison, and we have 3 new members who literally just stepped on, so I'm sure it was a challenge for them to try and review it as easy as you've made it for us to understand the budget. It's still a lot to go through in a short time for them just getting on board. And I totally respect their input and their comments, but for me at this point, I feel, and I do feel a total understanding of why they may have called those out, because of the spirit of the two major Q&E. That being said, I also know that if we pull these out and put them back into the general fund, then we're going to pull something out of the general fund, and we're just going to end up moving the pots of money around because it's still all coming out of city funds. I don't want to establish a precedent that we are using funds out of the Q&E that become questionable, I guess, as far as whether they should be in that funding mechanism or not. And so I just want to be cognizant of that as we move forward with the budget year after year. And that's my comments. And I will pass it off to whoever would like to go next. So I will support the budget as it's presented by staff.
Can I just ask, I still haven't found it. Oh, it doesn't help me. I mean, if I squint, I guess it does. Does it have anything to do with the reserve amount, the 33%? Is that on there? Yes. That is on there?
So I was going to actually comment on that something that I definitely was not clear about at the CFAC meeting, let alone at last night's council meeting, but was clarified for me, was that the measure Q&E was included in that 33% emergency reserve. So I feel comfortable, and as being the CFAC liaison, appreciate the work that they did here. It was not easy. It was, we had numerous meetings. We didn't have quorum. Now we've added 3 people, and I'm so happy that we have them finally together, and I'm looking forward to doing work with them. But as where it stands right now, knowing that we have that in the general fund reserve, emergency reserve, I feel comfortable moving forward with these items in the budget as budgeted.
I feel comfortable as well, aside from the one comment that I made yesterday about the looking at the there was a recommendation, not this, I don't think that was from CFAC. Yeah, the pavement management question. So there had been a recommendation that perhaps that was cut back, and I don't think that's for me anyway, I don't think that's the right thing to do. We all know our roads look horrible. And so I think that's something I wouldn't want to take out.
Thank you, Councilmember Barton. Councilmember Landrum?
You asking?
And we're just weighing in on our
yeah,
recommendation to staff on whether or not to pull anything from the proposed budget that was in CFAC's input.
No, I think the budget looks fine. Can I ask one more question of Mr. Kwolek regarding this paving? You know the street, the little alleyway that's behind the police station? and then on the other side of or is that Piney Way? Yeah, Piney and down to the following street down. Is that part of what's going to be improved? Because I'd say that's pretty similar to Preston Lane status.
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Landon. That issue has certainly received some attention, and we don't currently have funding to address that issue. As bad as it is, it's an area that we can look at. We, as in the proposed budget for next fiscal year, we would have a couple of different options to choose from in terms of looking at addressing that, because we'd have some operations funding for an on-call pavement work, as well as the large capital project. So, if that's a priority for council, it's certainly something we can look at.
Yeah, it's kind of third world.
So thank you. I think that we have direction. Is there something you wanted to add?
I just want to say that, yesterday I had mentioned, my appreciation for CFAC, and I understand that they were doing what they feel they're tasked to do, which is to be responsible with our money and our taxpayers' money. And but the reason why I feel comfortable moving forward and not cutting these items is because I feel like all of them are safety issues. All of them. Our responsibility ultimately as council is to do what we can to make sure that our citizens are as safe as possible within our community. And so I feel if we were to cut any of these things that, A, somebody may be injured, and B, I think that most of these items actually could bring us more funding in the long run if we do bring them forward. So anyway, I just feel more comfortable moving forward with that because of that reason. So, but great job on the proposed budget. So, yeah.
Thank you, Council. So, Ms. Johnson-Rios, I think then that there's a consensus that we would move forward with the budget as presented at this point. And again, I think from everyone here, we appreciate the work that CFAC did and certainly understand their concern about going outside the parameters of the intent of that funding source. So I think that all five of us will continue to be cognizant of that. And
Can I ask Ms. Johnson-Rios one last question? I'm so fascinated by the valuation of the value of the city, the roughly $3 billion. And so is that like, I mean, I don't really understand how they come to that number. Does that mean that people's properties are considered not theirs, or how is that a part of the valuation?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Landrum. I think this appears in the budget document in relation to the amount of debt that the city could issue, a general obligation debt that would require voter approval, of which we don't have any, but we do cite it's the citywide assessed value. It's all property in the city that's taxable. That represents the total value from the county assessor's office of all taxable property in the city.
So the total value of any building or any property
Of a taxable buildings.
of
there
a
are
taxable,
exemptions,
which is pretty much most everything. So even though it's not, that's
and
interesting.
land and
Yeah.
and improvements.
I would think that the amount that they can tax would be valued, but it just seems that it's not the city's value or you know what I mean?
I think it's just referring to within the city limits of the city of Morro Bay, any taxable property, commercial or residential, gets assigned a value by the county assessor each year, and then that drives property tax from there. So, and there's state law that prescribes what our debt limit is, and it's tied to that value.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Sure.
thank you very much again, staff, and all your teams, everyone. And Mr. Ridio, thank you. By the way, Harbor Street looks really good right now. Thank you, the park and the sidewalks. Awesome job. Thank you for overseeing that. With that, before we move to item number 2, which will be the water reclamation facility contract amendments, I think we're going to take a 5-minute break. Thank you.
You are good to go.
Thank you very much. Welcome back. Thank you for indulging us a short break. And with that, we're going to move to item number 2, which will be approval of the water reclamation facility contract amendments and review. Comment on the fiscal year 2023 quarter 3 Wharf quarterly report. And I believe this is you, Mr. Qualix-Knight.
Thank you, Mayor. We'll try to make this item as quick as possible, given the time. And I'll say that I believe this is the second to last quarterly report, at least in this form that we'll be bringing, because we do have 2 major contracts coming to a close over the next few months. So yes, the City Council will be asked to approve 5 contract amendments. 2 of them are non-compensable. The Carollo Engineering contract and the Confluence Engineering contract. Those are just date extensions. There's no additional funding being requested. For 3 of them, we are requesting additional funding, one for Anvil Builders, one for Felance Black & Veatch, and one for Cogstone. So I'll bring up Paul to present the Wharf Quarterly Report briefly, which has been made available already to the PWAB and to the City Council, and also to present information on the contract amendments.
Thanks, Director Kwolek. Good evening again. Paul Amico, Wharf Program Manager. The quarterly reports, I always say, is kind of strange because the quarter ended 6 weeks ago or more, and I'm talking about things that happened 6 weeks ago. But as Director Kwolek said, this will be one of the last quarterly reports that I present before Mr. Heimel takes over and takes it from there. As we normally do, I like to do a construction update. But again, it's strange because construction's done. So we have, for both conveyance facilities and Felance Black & Veatch, we've issued what we call substantial completion. I have a slide on that. But this picture shows Pump Station B over by Limos on Main Street, and then a picture that I'm especially proud of, which is the open bike path. And I will admit freely that I was the one that messed up the date. But then Anvil was the one that took forever to get the thing open. So we all share in the misery. But the bike path is open, and I hope people have been using it, and you all are happy with it. It's certainly a lot more wide open than it was. So I mentioned substantial completion. Both the pipeline project and the water reclamation facility, or the Water Resources Center, have achieved substantial completion. This is a contract milestone, and we issue what's called substantial when the facility is available for its intended use. The pump stations and pipelines, actually, we issued a partial occupancy for those because they needed to be available to be able to pump wastewater to the plant. That happened back in October, but then we actually sent them a letter along with Felance Black & Veatch in the last quarter. So right now, the punch list, what we call the punch list, is the remaining work items. That's pretty well in progress. Anvil's almost done with theirs. They're just waiting on some materials. They'll be back in town a couple more times, maybe to do some couple little items. And then the punch list with Felance Black & Veatch is almost completed as well. Several of the council members, I believe, were at the completion event on February 23rd. So it's a proud moment for the project team and for the city. We did achieve the regulatory deadline for the Water Resources Center, so that was a good time. So the quarterly report update. We submitted this to the city back on the 11th and presented it to PWAB last week. and presents our accomplishments, challenges, and upcoming activities. I'm going to turn it over to Dan Heimel. The schedule really will be focused from this point forward on the recycled water facilities. So Dan's going to do the recycled water update before it hands it back over to me for the change orders.
Mayor Wixom, members of the council, I know it's not actually on this agenda item, but I fully support Veterans Hall improvements and potentially a taller microphone. But yes, recycled water schedule overview, just a quick update with what we've been working on the recycled water program. Again, this is a little bit of dated data, as Paul mentioned, but we finished the extended injection test in January. And then the real work began, taking the results from that test, both the hydraulic results, the travel time results, the water quality results, and developing the basis of design report. And as Greg mentioned, that report has been prepared in an admin draft form and shared with the program team and city staff, as well as a peer review hydrogeologist that's evaluating the findings from that report and recommendations, and then will be contributing their own input as well to the program. So that's what we've been focused on. With the basis of the design report and the recommendations for the program, we're both looking at what a full-scale build-out program could look like with those future flows and future demands that we talked about earlier, but also what's the near-term implementation plan for this IPR program to meet the needs that the city has today for a reliable, resilient water supply portfolio. And I know it didn't happen last quarter, but I want to mention it anyway. We learned last week that the city did get final confirmation from the Department of Water Resources that it will receive $1.2 million in grant funding through the IRWM, Prop 1 Round 2 IRWM implementation grant for the recycled water portion of the project. So happy to have that confirmed. And then just briefly, the recycled water program schedule. You know, the efforts this year are focused around the conceptual design of the program from the basis design report, and then moving into detailed design of the injection wells and the pipelines to feed the IPR water to those wells, and then construction initiating in 2024 and injection in 2025. That concludes my portion of the presentation.
Any questions on construction update or the quarterly report before we move to the contract amendments?
Is the basis of design, is this something that's been, we've seen in the subcommittee?
No, it has not been presented to the subcommittee yet.
Okay, so is it something that we can learn about now, or?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk to city staff
like
about when.
Oh, okay. I thought you could tell us like now how much it was gonna cost. Oh.
So I'll add that once we have a final basis of design report, because if I recall, there was a recommendation from the WRF subcommittee to engage in peer review to ensure that all the numbers are appropriate. City staff, in collaboration with project manager Heimel, will be offering options for the city council and for the subcommittee to look at in terms of next steps, if we go with 2 wells or 4 wells, or if we phase the project. But we want to make sure that that basis of design report is final before we do that.
And I guess I would just add one thing. The basis of design report, really, it's a hydrogeologic report. It's going to identify and provide recommendations for where to site the wells, how much water, recycled water, those wells could inject, how much water the city could extract from its existing extraction wells. But it's not going to have cost information necessarily. Now, the engineering team can take those recommendations, route pipelines, develop cost estimates, but just wanted to be clear, the basis design report itself is more of a hydrogeologic focus study with recommendations for how the program could be implemented.
And Mayor, if I may, before Paul moves on, I do want to make one acknowledgement. I neglected to put a slide in the staff report, but before Paul goes into the contract amendments, the city was recognized by the regional chapter of the American Society of Civil Engineers for engineering project of the year. Is that correct?
Environmental engineering?
Environmental engineering project of the year, and Damaris Hanson did attend that ceremony to receive the project. We will be putting out a press release on it. Damaris, do you want to say a couple words?
I'll just say that we actually won 2 awards. We won the Environmental Engineering Award and the Sustainable Environmental Engineering Award. And then these awards were for the San Luis chapter, but they're also being submitted to the Los Angeles chapter as well.
Thank you for your work on that, all of you. Thank you. Congratulations.
Okay, Paul.
Okay, the contract amendments, as we've discussed, there are 5 contract amendments, 2 non-compensable, and then the 3 contract amendments, 2, one for Anvil Builders, and then one for Freelance Black and Veatch. Just so I'll run through at a pretty high level what we got from Anvil. This will be their final amendment. We will not receive any more change order requests from them or anything. So they submitted in their final amendment just shy of $4.2 million across 35 potential change orders. I had gotten some questions in the past about why so many, why at the end, aren't we done? And this is a couple of these are pretty unusual, but for the project team in the final push of a project to have change orders kind of at the end isn't quite that unusual. We always have a final balancing change order on a unit price contract like this, but then there was just a lot of extra work that Anvil ended up doing to get the project to completion. The other thing I would add to this is, unfortunately, their project manager went out on medical leave for about a month and a half, and so that hung this up as well because there was nobody that was really that familiar with the pricing. So it just took us a while to get through the negotiation of these change orders. So within that, the colored bar on this represents each one of the colors is a different change order, different potential change order, and it's sized relative to the size of the change order. There were 21 of the change orders that we didn't dispute their merit or their entitlement to that. Those total $1.62 million, and I'll present on those, and that's what you're considering tonight. The remainder of those, 7 of those PCOs, the merit and entitlement wasn't crystal clear. They could go either way. If Anvil challenged us and took that to mediation, that's kind of it'd be a toss-up. And so if they wanted to pursue these with the city and went to mediation, we don't know how a mediator might rule on that. And then there were 2 very large claims, $2.2 million worth, one for a material price escalation and then the other for accelerating to meet the deadline. We have provided them feedback on the acceleration claim, and they did not necessarily reply with any follow-up information based on what we had asked. So I'm not recommending at this point in time that we consider those or the ones where the merit and entitlement was not crystal clear. So right now the council is considering the $1.62 million. And in addition to the $1.62 million, there's actually a credit, a $207,000 credit for de-scoping a storm drain replacement in the yard that they utilized for their as their field office here. I mean, unless you all want me to go through these line by line, I don't know if you want to pull any of these in specific, but I'll hit some of the highlights. The paving limit revisions. This was a quantity. They exhausted all the quantities within the paving, and then we asked them to pave the north side of Quintana. That area of the city did not hold up well under the construction traffic and also the added load from when we closed South Bay Boulevard. So that pavement came apart, and then the storms obviously were not very kind to that pavement either. So working with City Engineer Ridio and our project team, we worked with Anvil, and they paved the north side of the road plus a portion of the one of the pipelines on the Vistra property and an easement that we had gotten, and also they did some additional subgrade improvements over at Kings and Quintana as well that were not anticipated. So that was a large one. Number 65, which is a new diversion manhole, and replaced that just shy of $300,000. We got a credit for that. They had to relocate that very tight location. Unforeseen utilities when they started excavating in that area. It went from a precast structure to a cast-in-place structure, which was what really largely drove the price increase. The fiber optic design revisions and upgrades, that was another not well-defined task for them when we went into this. When the project was originally bid, the city's integrator didn't exactly know how that was going to be designed, and so this was we always knew that we were going to end up paying a change order for this. They actually asked for quite a bit more on this, but we negotiated probably about $100,000 off of their original ask with this. And then just a couple other ones, water line replacement at Pump Station A, $117,000. This was a discussion between the city and Anvil. There was some improvements that Anvil had to make to that line. That's a very old asbestos cement line. So we call them transite pipe in that area. They had to add some valves to it, at the city's request, and then ended up just replacing a lot more water line than was originally anticipated on that one. I think those are the big ticket items. Any questions on any of the individual items, rather than me going down the list?
I think we're good right now, and I would just share, thank you for this, for the public, and just so they know, we've seen this 2 or 3 times already, as anyone who's noted that we've had closed session items that have been discussing this in advance. So we're not asking you questions. We've seen this and discussed it many times, so thank you for the information. And ready to move forward.
Great, okay. So the total amendment for Anvil Builders would be $1.4 million, just over $1.4 million, that includes that credit. So Felance Black and Veatch Amendment 9, as I had discussed in the other presentation, this is an increase to the guaranteed maximum price. Much of this work has been performed, and that's kind of how the project team and the contract contemplated that this would move forward. Is that as much as possible when we're during construction, we'll brief the WRF subcommittee on what these items are, and then move those forward. Just to highlight on this one, a couple of these, the computerized maintenance management software scope and implementation, this represents a change from the original design build proposal. The city wanted a different software package, so it was the increased cost for the software and then the annual maintenance. I wasn't terribly happy with the way this went down, so Felance Black and Veatch agreed to eat their labor on this. They came at us with about $130,000, $140,000, and we negotiated that. And I just told them, I said, if you guys had done a better job on this, we wouldn't be incurring those costs. So we settled on just paying for the additional costs of the software. The seed sludge maintenance period, the city, when we originally tried to start the plan up on October 4th, Anvil took a couple extra days to test the pump stations, and we made the call late in the week with Damaris and the operations staff to postpone that until the following week because the guys had been working very long hours. They were running up against overtime. They were not going to be able to charge any more overtime. And much like the lesson we learned at the time is you don't order sludge on a Monday. You also don't start up wastewater plants on a Friday. So they incurred additional cost on that particular item. And then the other items in here, unlike Anvil, Felance Black and Veatch's contract allows for material price escalation. They're entitled to that due to pandemics. And so that's specifically written into the contract, and that's what number 128 is. Any questions on any of the other ones? The other ones are additional instruments that were required, and then the rancher gate was requested by the city for the adjacent property.
Thank you. Questions from anyone? Thank you, Paul.
As we said, Corollo and Confluence, this simply just extends our contracts because our contracts expire at the end of the fiscal year, but we both Confluence and Corollo have unspent budget that we can continue working and to close out the Felance contract. And also, we support permitting of the recycled water facilities. We also do a lot of funding support for the city, do the disbursements from the manage all the disbursements from the funding agencies, and then support Dan in the recycled water facility permitting. The last one is the final amendment from Cogstone Resource Management Group. This was the final push. There was just more dig days that needed to be observed by Native American monitors for that, so they incurred about $31,000 of additional time on the project that Cogstone needs to be compensated for. Questions and discussion?
Thank you. Council questions? No? Council questions? No?
I just wonder, is it not a good idea to separate the issues, like the contract extensions from the other stuff? It seems like it, or contract amendments separate, one contract separate from another? Is that cleaner, city attorney?
Do you mean the actual approval of the contract amendments? It can be done either way at the pleasure of the council. They can be done as a group, or they can all be done individually.
It wouldn't make a difference?
Not legally, it doesn't.
Okay, that seems easier then. And what is not, so there's no payment due? Was it what that means?
Non-compensable contract amendment means that the amendment doesn't involve any increase or decrease in the contract amount. So that there's no implications for how much the contractor's paid. We're just changing the date of the contract, the expiration date.
Okay, thank you.
Any comments from council? No? I'm just gonna, one thing, and again, I just want to share with the community that the five of us have had an opportunity to review this several times as we've gone through the process of vetting what we felt were the city's responsibility to expenses and what we had questions on. And I appreciate the work that Public Works has done and that you've done also, Paul, for us. And we're very fatigued with these charges, as we've shared with you, and we know our community is also. And this is why those who've seen it on the closed session the last couple times, I hope they understand it's because we're fighting for this too. And it doesn't, none of this makes it easy for any of us to pass this on again one more time, and we understand that. It's frustrating, but after having it all vetted out and understanding the responsibilities we have, those who might say, you fight for it, we've discussed that too, and the alternative is, expensive litigation. And so, at this point, for these expenses and things, I think that, the five of us have had an opportunity to work with all of you and staff to, to come to this point and move forward. So the paving, I just want to, and I know we talked about it before, I think on Quintana, so many people have been frustrated with the paving or the roads being tore up. They were doing their share, and the expenses that the city incurred were to why they were mobilized, just for the public to know why they were mobilized. We went ahead and funded that to do the extras so that we weren't coming back and doing our part later. And thank you, Mr. Ridio, for bringing that to our attention as it was happening, because it was certainly a cleaner deal and probably less expensive. Right. So that's that part, because I know everybody in the communities, I hope they're paying for it. So they did. We just did some extra things. So with that, somebody who wants to share their voice this evening that would like to entertain this motion? Ready? Oh, Laurel, you are so good.
Okay. So, let's see here. Staff recommends the City Council review and provide input on fiscal year 2023 Quarter 3 WRF Program Quarterly Report. Staff also recommends that the City Council authorize the City Manager to execute the following WRF program contract and budget amendments. Number 1 is Amendment Number 8 to the agreement with Anvil Builders for the WRC lift stations and off-site pipelines construction, which results in a total not to exceed contract amount of $36,384,606. 2, Amendment Number 9 to the agreement with Phelong Black and Veatch for the Water Reclamation Facility construction project for $409,028, which increases the guaranteed maximum price to $78,424,326 to extend the final completion date to August 31st, 2023. Number 3, Amendment 4 to the agreement with Cogstone Resource Management for cultural resources monitoring services during construction of the WRC lift station and off-site pipelines for a total amount of $31,033.52, resulting in a total not to exceed amount of $1,524,560.64. Number 4 is Amendment Number 8 to the agreement with Carollo Engineers to extend their contract expiration date to June 30th, 2024. This is a non-compensable contract extension. Number 5, Amendment Number 2 to the agreement with, I'm going to say it wrong, Confluence Engineering Solutions to extend their contract expiration date to June 30th, 2024. This is a non-compensable contract extension. So-
Perfect. Thank you. I'll second that motion. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Barton?
Yes.
Councilmember Edwards?
Yes.
Councilmember Landrum?
Yes.
Councilmember Ford?
Yes.
And Mayor Wixom?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you to the Public Works Department, all of you for the presentations this evening, and to our consultants, thank you both for being here. And with that, we will adjourn, and we will see everyone back on June 13th. Thank you very much.
Thank you.